Illuminated by the moonlight under the starry sky, drowning in flowers, stood the majestic mansion of the Earl of Bailey. Hildegard Bailey, or simply Hilda, the only daughter of Count Bailey, sat thoughtfully at the table, and after some time the girl made a decision, from which her eyes sparkled with determination. Suddenly a wind blew through the open window, bringing with it coolness and the pleasant scent of flowers. Placing her hands on the table, Hilda decided it was time to begin. The girl stood up and decided that she needed to pick out some fabric first. She unrolled the roll that was lying on the table. Calling the man over and picking up the fabric, Hilda quickly took measurements. Then, having laid out the fabric on the table, the girl made markings with chalk. Having finished making the markings, she confidently cut out the piece with scissors. Then Hilda repeated all these steps with the remaining parts. After this, the girl took a needle and thread in her hands and began to carefully sew everything together. And so, having laid out the finished product on the table, Hilda decided that it was impeccable. Having sewn the first shirt and a pair of gloves, the girl continued sewing. And finally, having neatly laid out several sets of shirts and gloves, Hilda decided that everything was ready. Returning home, the girl went into her mother's room. Smiling and looking at Countess Bailey, Hilda said that she was home. Her mother, sitting in bed covered with a blanket, asked the girl with a smile in response if she had returned. The girl approached the Countess, took her hand and asked how she was feeling, to which the woman replied that overall everything was fine. And then, saying that it was very noisy outside, she asked her daughter if she knew what had happened there, to which the girl replied that there would soon be a festival in honor of the founding of the city. Then Hilda added that most likely everyone was busy preparing for it. The Countess was surprised. Was it really already time for the festival? Taking the girl's hand in hers and seeing how wounded it was, the woman became upset. Hilda, hiding her hands behind her back, smiled and asked her mother not to pay attention to trifles. She explained that the tailor asked her to sew an outfit. Pouring tea from the teapot into a cup, she added that he said that only she could handle this job because the girl was very skilled. When Hilda heard her mother say that it was time for them to find her a groom soon, her hand tightly gripped the handle of the teapot. The Countess, looking at her daughter, who was standing with her back to her, said that if she sewed and ran the household, she would not advance anywhere, and next year she would become an adult. The woman added seriously that if Hilda wanted to inherit the title, she would need to get married. Still standing with her back turned, the girl did not answer her mother. But after some time, she turned to her with a smile and said that she would think about it. Having given the Countess some medicine, Hilda asked her to take it so that she would recover quickly and they could go to the festival together. Looking at her mother, the girl added that they would eat something tasty there and look at the sights. The Countess, hearing these words, looked at her daughter with only a sad smile. Placing her hand on the girl's hand, the woman agreed with Hilda, and then, looking at her daughter and smiling at her, she added that they would definitely go there. Leaving the room and leaning on the closed door, the girl thought that her mother's face was very pale. Hilda thought sadly that she could not get better medicine for her. Approaching the window, the girl thought that now she was the only daughter of the Bailey family, Hildegard Bailey. Placing her hand on the glass, she remembered that in her past life she lived in South Korea, in a family where, from generation to generation, hanboks were sewn. As a little girl, she crawled to her grandmother, who told her that from that day on, she would begin to learn the art of making hanboki. And thanks to her grandmother's almost military upbringing, the girl became a skilled seamstress. Grandma was strict about making sure the stitches were straight and got angry if they weren't, and then the girl went through a rebellious phase. And she entered the university to become a Western fashion designer, which made her grandmother so angry that she even called her a traitor. The girl spent her entire student years arguing with her grandmother, who asked her to return home, but always received a negative answer. Looking at the sky, Hilda remembered that they had managed to find a common language, and she had returned home, but no one thought then that the girl would die in an accident. At that moment, she decided that this was the end of her life's story, but the girl was mistaken. After death, she was reborn into the Bailey family. Walking down the corridor, Hilda still didn't know why she retained the memories of her past life. As she reached the family portrait hanging on the wall, she thought that it was a real blessing to be born here. After all, loving parents surrounded their only daughter with care, and she became attached to them with all her heart. Looking at the wall where the painting hung, Hilda realized that their family was terribly poor. And then, noticing that the paint was peeling off the wall, the girl decided to hang a tapestry there. Even though she created it to hide the cracks in her room, it was better to hang it here than to upset her mother. Sometimes Hilda thought that if her family were a little more prosperous, she would not have to work so much. Or how things would have turned out if father had been alive and mother had not been so sick. That's what the girl thought about, looking at the family portrait. And then, pinching her cheeks, Hilda decided that she had enough of these sad thoughts. She went to complete the delivery with enthusiasm, since Madame Shirley had promised a generous payment this time. Hilda understood that they were currently having a hard time with finances and was happy even with a small bonus on top of her pay. And the girl also believed that bright days lay ahead for them. Night had fallen, and the rare stars illuminated the branches of the trees, which stood as dark silhouettes. There were 2 men standing in the living room, and one of them was reading something from papers he was holding in his hands. The second man stood with his arms folded across his chest and listened to the first with a frown. And then he asked if this was the last batch, to which he replied that this was the last order from the National Studio. Taking the glove in his hands, the man was very surprised and asked who had made it. His assistant, having checked the papers, replied that this batch was sewn in Madame Shirley's studio. Then the man asked the name of the tailor. That same day, Hilda was walking down the street and was happy that she had received a good bonus. The girl was happy that now she would even be able to give bonuses to the staff. And the assistant added in response to the question, "It is written that the tailor is a young lady from the Bailey family." The man, hearing that this lady was from the Bailey family, made some kind of decision. Namely, he ordered his assistant to send the girl an invitation. Then the man walked to the window and looked out at the starry sky. And then turning to his assistant, he ordered him to say that the invitation was from Baron Rigel. That same day, Hilda, walking down the street with a bag, thought that she would be paid a maximum of 1.5 times more, but they gave her twice as much. At Madame Shirley's studio, the owner, giving her money, said that this time she was really worried because the order was large and intended for an important person, but she was glad that she entrusted it to the girl. Hilda didn't expect that her job was for important people, but she decided that if they paid, then nothing else mattered, and she could finally give Lucy and the butler a bonus. The girl walked down the street and looked at the people passing by, and the longer Hilda looked at their clothes, the sadder she became. After all, when you imagine medieval clothing, your imagination draws lush dresses with frills and lace. But in this world, such decorations and patterns have never been heard of, and there is not even an idea of patterns yet. The girl remembered that a pattern is a template used to sew clothes, and there are countless variations. But, unfortunately, there wasn't even a measuring tape here, and the fabric is adjusted to the figure, and therefore, often the finished item doesn't fit perfectly, Hilda realized. Also, there are no sewing machines here, and the weaving technology is so outdated that it is almost impossible to find beautiful fabric. The girl was upset, because even if she started making patterns, the paper of the right size was very expensive. She had the skills, but she couldn't use them. This was very annoying for Hilda, because patterns are her strong point. Hilda walked and thought that she really wanted to create beautiful outfits. Some time later, the mansion of the Earl of Bailey family stood quietly under the rays of the bright sun. But then a loud cry was heard calling Hilda. The girl who was sitting on a chair at that time turned her head towards the door. The door was thrown open, and the out-of-breath maid Lucy ran into the room to tell her mistress that she had received something. When Hilda asked what had come to her, Lucy hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to answer, and then suddenly she asked what she was doing, to which the girl replied that she was making a tapestry to cover the crack, to which the maid noted that the mistress had already hung one like that in the corridor. Lucy waved her hand sharply and said that now was not the time for this, which surprised the lady, who even asked what she should do then. With a smile, the maid handed over a sealed envelope and said that she had received an invitation. The invitation was from Baron Rigel, inviting a young lady with graceful hands, the daughter of Count Bailey, to tea. Hilda asked Lucy in surprise, "Who is this Baron Rigel anyway?" And then, looking at her hands, she wondered if they really were graceful. Suddenly the maid said, looking at her mistress, that she knew this man. She said she had heard that he was traveling before the festival, and that there were rumors of his incredible beauty, and that he was incredibly rich, and had recently been distributing medicine and food in the poorest neighborhoods. Closing her eyes and blushing slightly, the maid asked her mistress if he was not beautiful, to which Hilda replied that he probably was. Continuing to embroider the tapestry, the girl added that the Baron was truly a wonderful person. The maid, hearing such an indifferent answer from her mistress and the fact that she continued to do her job, was disappointed. So after a short silence, she called Miss Hilda by name, which surprised the girl. And Lucy, smiling, said that since she had been invited, why shouldn't she go, since she hadn't attended a social event for a long time? The maid added that she should not be given a bonus for the festival, but it would be better to spend it on a dress, which Hilda did not agree with, and Lucy then began to ask her very strongly about it. The maid pouted and reminded that Madame had asked Hilda to take a closer look at the suitors. And then Lucy added that she could sew a new dress for herself. The girl immediately thought of a beautiful dress. Then, after a little silence and thought, Miss Hilda gave her consent. The girl looked at the maid with a smile and said that she had persuaded her, which made Lucy very happy. The maid ran away, shouting excitedly that she would look for beautiful hair accessories, and Hilda thought that many things had already been sold and the choice would be small. Left alone in the room, the girl continued embroidering with a thoughtful look. She remembered her mother's words that her name meant happiness, and that her great-grandmother, the daughter of a knight, married for love. Stretching out her hands to the girl, the Countess added that that was why she named her Hildegard in her honor. Stroking her daughter on the cheek, the mother said that she would definitely be happy, and also that she will certainly meet someone who will surpass even her father. Thinking about it, Hilda realized that in her past life she had never dreamed of marriage. Standing up and going to the window, the girl thought that now she needed to concentrate on sewing the dress. On the day of the tea party, the sky was blue and sunny, and when the carriage drove up to the gates of Baron Rigel's mansion, it stopped. Carefully holding her dress, the daughter of the Earl of Bailey emerged from it. Seeing the place she ended up in, the girl opened her eyes wide in surprise. Hilda pressed her hand to her chest and continued to look around, thinking that it was incredibly luxurious and magnificent here. The girl decided that their house was far from that, and they were similar only in size, and suddenly a man called out to her, asking if she should have been taken to the reception area. Hilda turned around and saw a man with blonde hair hurrying towards her. It was Baron Rigel, with a slightly cold and even frightening look. When Hilda saw him, she thought that the Baron was an incredibly handsome man, and with such an appearance it simply shouldn't be legal. The Baron, despite his cold gaze, smiled at the girl and thanked her for accepting his invitation. And when the man said that he was waiting for her, the Earl of Bailey's daughter thought that he had a divine voice. Blushing slightly, the girl asked herself if she would be able to avoid embarrassing herself at this reception. She looked at Baron Rigel, and he looked back at her. As they walked down the corridor of the mansion, the Baron admitted that he had tried to think everything through, but perhaps he had missed a lot, since he had not received guests for a long time. Smiling, he added that if the girl felt uncomfortable, she should tell him right away, to which he received a positive response. At this time, Hilda was thinking that although she had seen many handsome men on TV in her past life, she had never seen such men, and therefore she was terribly nervous. The Baron, noticing this, said that she looked a little confused, with which the girl did not agree. As they approached the living room, the man apologized for his tactlessness and admitted that he wanted to see her as soon as possible. Embarrassed, Hilda looked down and, despite the Baron, replied that everything was fine. When they entered the doors opened by the servants, the girl suddenly froze. After all, she saw a very beautiful tapestry hanging above the fireplace. Looking at it, Hilda thought that the pattern on it was delicate and intricate. And then, even forgetting about the man, she quickly went to the fireplace to look at the drawing closer. Hilda stood silently and admired the tapestry, realizing what a stunning piece of work it was. The Baron walked quietly up to the girl and asked if she liked the tapestry. Looking at Hilda, he added that if she liked it, he would like to give her the tapestry, to which the girl replied that she only admired the work and did not want to get it. The Earl of Bailey's daughter thought to herself that she had perhaps been looking too closely at the tapestry, and then she noticed that there was no one else in the room. Looking at the Baron, she asked if she had come too early. When the girl heard the Baron's answer that no one else would come, she was very surprised. Baron Rigel admitted that he had sent only one invitation because he wanted to see only her, the daughter of Count Bailey. They sat down at a table where there were cakes and tea. Smiling and pointing to the teapot, Baron Regal asked if she would like some tea. He then added that the tea would help her relax a little and received a positive response from the embarrassed girl. When the tea was poured into the mug, the girl wrapped her hands around it, warming her fingers on the hot ceramic. Then, lifting the mug and taking a small sip, she realized that the taste was familiar to her. Closing her eyes, the girl thought that, as she had guessed it was kupena tea, she recognized it by its aroma, and it turned out to be a pleasant surprise. Baron Rigel watched as Count Bailey's daughter drank tea with pleasure and remained silent. Then, putting cakes on the plate, he calmly remarked that she seemed to like the tea. The Baron said that he thought for a long time about what to serve, and in the end chose a special tea brought from a distant continent, which greatly surprised Hilda. Thinking that he was being too kind, the girl decided to clarify whether there had been any misunderstanding, and she asked if he had confused her with the daughter of another count, to which the Baron replied that he had sent the invitation to Lady Hildegard Bailey, to which Hilda replied that it was she. As he was about to break off a piece of cake with his fork, the man asked if he should have included the portrait. Hearing this, the girl froze in surprise, sitting on the chair. The Baron, with an unperturbed expression, offered to pour her another cup, but Hilda was shocked as she thought about what the man had said. Namely, about an event that among the nobility is associated with the mention of portraits and private meetings. The girl couldn't come to her senses because that only happens at a bride show. Then Hilda decided to ask the Baron about it directly, to which the man, standing up, replied that she understood everything correctly. Then he came closer and, handing the girl a cake, added that she had exceeded all his expectations. The Baron suddenly dropped to one knee and, taking the girl's hand in his, called her the lady with the beautiful hands. Then, looking at Hilda, Baron Rigel said with trepidation that he sincerely asked for her hand. Hearing this, the girl looked at the man in shock, not understanding what was happening. And suddenly the door to the living room swung open and an assistant flew in, calling the Baron His Highness, the Crown Prince. The young man continued that he had an urgent report about what was happening in the Imperial Palace. The Baron stood up and the girl turned in her chair, and they both looked at the assistant. Hilda did not understand why the Baron was called His Highness and what the Imperial Palace had to do with it. Looking at the man, the girl could not believe it and thought that perhaps she was sleeping. The Baron, looking at Hilda in response, heard her ask if he really was the Crown Prince. Smiling, the man gave Lady Bailey a positive answer. He still held Hilda's hand in his and looked at her intently. When the girl returned home, she was met by a maid who was eagerly awaiting her return. Lucy, closing her eyes, dreamily asked the lady how the tea party had gone, but did not hear an answer, because Hilda simply walked past silently. Turning around, the maid did not understand what was happening, because her mistress had simply run to her room. Having run there, Hilda first of all took out the books that described the complete genealogical tree of the imperial family. There the girl found the name of Crown Prince Raymond Glitzen, Baron of Rigel, and understood why no one knew about it. Hilda thought it was one thing to know someone from the capital's aristocracy, but in a place as remote as their city, no one followed the capital's news. And then she realized with horror that she hadn't even guessed about it. Hilda remembered that after she learned that Baron Rigel was the Crown Prince, he said that since everything was revealed, there was nowhere to retreat. Looking at the girl, His Highness added that his feelings came from the heart. Opening the box he was holding in his hands, the Crown Prince said that he had been looking for someone like her for a long time. Upon hearing this, Hilda asked what he meant. Taking out the gloves, the man added that he wanted to get engaged to the woman who sewed them. Taking a closer look, the girl realized that these were the same gloves that she had taken to the studio that morning. Hilda remembered Madame Shirley saying that they were meant for an important person, and realized that the gloves were made for the Imperial Palace. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince continued that the founding celebration was approaching, and according to tradition, gloves for that day should be sewn by the owner's wife or family member. He also said that he has long dreamed that his wife could continue to sew such perfect gloves. When the Crown Prince added that he needed her beautiful hands, the girl looked at him in surprise. Hilda was a little embarrassed. If you think about it, it was all quite cute. Although the girl enjoyed sewing, part of her dreamed of escaping the life in which she never let go of a needle and thread. Besides, Hilda never dreamed of getting married. She thought that she would marry someone who would provide her with a stable life. After thinking it over, the girl told the Crown Prince that she refused his offer. The crown prince and his assistant looked at Hilda in surprise when they heard her answer. Then His Highness cast an angry glance at the young man, but he did not answer. The Baron, putting his hand to his chest, asked the girl if he could find out the reason for the refusal. To this, Hilda replied that, firstly, her hands were not at all beautiful. Picking them up and showing them to the man, she looked at them carefully herself. And then she added that, secondly, her status did not allow her to agree upon hearing this. The crown prince said that it meant that he was truly unworthy of her. He explained that he was too insignificant to desire a craftswoman like her. When the Baron added that even the court seamstresses were amazed by her skill, the girl waved her hands and exclaimed that she was not a match for him. Hilda added that she was taught that marriage is only possible with trust and mutual respect. Looking at the crown prince, she said that he had tried to deceive her from the very beginning, which meant that he was not right for her. Remembering all this, Hilda dropped her head on the table and decided that she had gone completely crazy. Not only had she refused, but she had also been rude. And then she thought with horror that the crown prince would punish her for this. Suddenly, thinking about the punishment, Hilda sat up and tried to remember something related to it. Lucy looked into the room and asked if her mistress was okay and what had happened at the reception. And the girl, with her head down on her hands, kept trying to remember what exactly she had forgotten. Without raising her head, Hilda replied to Lucy that it looked like she would soon die, and the maid responded that she couldn't say that. Hilda lay with her face buried in the table, looking indifferent, because she remembered what she was looking for. Namely, what happened when His Highness the Crown Prince was only 12 years old. After all, at such a young age, the heir to the throne killed his own uncle. While the girl was indulging in these terrible thoughts, his lordship stood at the window in his mansion. The assistant turned to the Crown Prince and asked him what he was planning. The man looked at the young man with displeasure and said that he had deliberately called him His Highness in front of the girl. The assistant just smiled and replied that it would come in very handy now. Lost in thought, the Baron remembered the girl's words about how she was taught that marriage is only possible with trust and respect, and also how Hilda said that he deceived her, which means he's not right for her. Remembering all this, the Crown Prince grinned and decided that he did not intend to give up. He realized that it was all because he wanted to be close to her, the daughter of the Earl of Bailey. Meanwhile, the maid Lucy was trying to bring her mistress to her senses. The girl kept thinking about what she remembered, about the Crown Prince Raymond Glitzen, about how, at the age of 12, he sentenced his own uncle to death, accusing him of treason. Having declared his uncle a criminal, the young Crown Prince sent him to one of the villages, and he ordered the inhabitants of that village to hunt him. But his uncle survived and reached the castle badly wounded and barely alive. Then the young prince hung him on the castle wall and left him to die. Hilda remembered that on that day she went to the capital with her parents for the first time, and this scene, a man hanged on the wall, shook the girl to the depths of her soul. Hilda decided that this was too cruel, because no matter what her uncle had done, it was impossible to treat her mentor and her family like game on a hunt. While getting dressed, the girl kept thinking about this and understood that even if the guilt was minimal, punishing like this was unacceptable. And suddenly, the thought came into her head that he could punish her too, just because she rejected his offer. At this time, there was a knock on the door of the room, and they asked if the lady was there. Turning around and allowing entry, the girl saw the butler, who, opening the door, reported urgent news. He added that the lady's condition was critical, which greatly frightened Hilda. The girl, together with the butler and the maid, entered the countess's room, where a doctor was sitting at her bedside. Hilda anxiously asked him about her mother's condition. Approaching the girl, the doctor bowed and asked for forgiveness. Hilda's eyes widened as she asked him what he was apologizing for and what he was saying. The man replied that he apologized for his lack of skills, and then he added that perhaps a doctor from the capital could help, but the illness was too serious, and he did everything in his power. The doctor said that he could only prescribe an antipyretic and hope for the best, which greatly upset the girl. The butler stood with a sad face, and Lucy covered her mouth with her hands, repeating that this could not be. The maid looked at her mistress with concern, not knowing how to help. The butler, placing his hand on his chest, turned to Miss Hilda, but the girl, without turning around and hugging herself, asked to be left alone. Hilda walked slowly along the corridor of the mansion, through the windows of which darkness was already peering. Walking up to the window and putting her hand on the glass, she thought that it was all her fault. Falling to her knees, Hilda decided that she should have tried at least a little harder. Tears streamed down her cheeks and fell to the floor, and she blamed herself for not providing her mother with decent care. In horror, Hilda thought that the Countess might die. At that moment she remembered how the tea party ended, namely with the words of His Highness, about how the Crown Prince caught up with the departing Hilda and proposed a fictitious marriage. The girl then asked if he meant that it would just be a formality, to which she received a positive answer. And then he added that if she had given in to his beautiful words, he would have become the ideal husband for her, but it didn't work. In persuading the girl, the Crown Prince offered to grant her new lands, and then, putting his hand to his chest, he said that he could give her not land, but what she really needed. After looking at Hilda carefully, his lordship handed her the communication device. Looking into her surprised eyes, he suggested that she think about it and use it when she was ready. Remembering this proposal, the girl thoughtfully peered into the darkness outside the window. She sat like that for a long time and thought about everything that had happened, and then her eyes filled with determination. The girl had decided everything for herself. Hilda stood up and walked quickly at first, then sped up and ran down the corridor. At this time, she thought about the reason why she was able to let go of her past life and accept a new one. Remembering the family portrait, Hilda realized that the reason was her parents in this world. After all, without their love and support from birth, she would have been lost between two lives. Thinking about this, the girl, a little out of breath, ran into her room. She remembered that she had hidden the device the Crown Prince had given her in a drawer, thinking that she would not need it. Thinking that she still didn't understand why he had made this offer, and not even being sure whether she was doing the right thing, Hilda decided that it didn't matter now, and used the device. She knew that the most important thing for her now was to save her mother. With her hands folded in a prayer gesture and her eyes closed, the girl prayed for the device to work. And then a glowing circle appeared on the floor, into which the Crown Prince began to descend. The man descended softly into the center of the circle, wearing home clothes and a robe thrown over his head. Seeing him, the girl was very surprised and asked how he ended up there. She thought he had simply given her a transmitter, but the man replied that it was a device with summoning magic and apologized for his informal appearance. His Highness then added that since she had called him at such an hour, he decided that the matter was urgent. With her head down, the girl said that he could call her shameless if he wanted, but her mother was dying. Looking up, she asked the man to bring a doctor from the capital. The Crown Prince approached her, put his hand on her cheek, and looking into her eyes, asked if she was okay. Looking Hilda in the eyes, he quietly told her not to worry. He would help her. Wiping away her tears, the man added that Countess Bailey was a noblewoman of the Empire, and if there was even the slightest chance to save her, and he missed it, he was unworthy of being the Crown Prince. Then, putting his finger to his lips, he asked that everything she saw here remain a secret. Suddenly, a small blue light appeared in his hand. Then, and in the second, and then there were many of them, and they began to circle around him. The girl looked at what was happening in surprise, not believing her eyes. What the Crown Prince was doing now was pure magic. She still couldn't get over what she had seen. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince quickly and decisively called for a doctor, and he was already examining her mother. Looking at the men, Hilda thought that the words quick and decisive best described what was happening. She remembered the Crown Prince saying that everything she saw here must remain a secret. And then he began to cast his spell again, and with the help of the magic formula, a new summoning circle was created. A moment later, a man appeared in it with his eyes closed, hugging a folded blanket. It was a doctor who appeared just above the floor and fell on it with a dull thud. The Crown Prince, calling him the royal physician, said that he had urgent business. The doctor looked at His Highness with displeasure, but he promised to explain later and asked to examine the patient. So, together with the royal physician, they all ended up in her mother's room, which greatly surprised the butler and the maid. The doctor quickly examined her and said that medicinal herbs needed to be brewed. He added that he would prepare everything, and Lucy volunteered to help him. At that moment, the girl was watching the men, placing her hands on her chest. Hilda looked closely at the Crown Prince and thought about him, namely, that he did not hesitate at all to help her. Suddenly, the woman lying on the bed let out a groan, and Hilda rushed towards her. With a scream, the girl ran to the bed and then saw that the Countess had opened her eyes. When the girl took her hand, the woman called her name questioningly. She did not understand what was happening. Hilda looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe that she had come to her senses. And then, falling on her knees on the floor and her head on the lying woman's chest, she began to cry bitterly. The doctor and the crown prince looked at the girl with a slight smile, whose fear of losing her mother was leaving her along with her tears. The brightening sky above the Earl of Bailey's mansion drove away the dark night. Hilda, putting the coffee on the table, apologized for keeping them waiting. She explained that she had sent the servants home. Sitting down opposite the crown prince, the girl asked the man where the royal physician had gone. When Hilda looked at His Highness with confusion, he explained that he had given him a stone of return, but the girl still did not quite understand this and assumed that it was some kind of magical artifact. Taking the mug in her hands, Lady Bailey turned to the crown prince and said that she was sincerely grateful to him for saving her mother. The girl added that it was only because of his good will that her fever subsided and she regained consciousness, which made Hilda extremely happy. Lady Bailey didn't know how to repay the man for his help, to which he asked her not to worry about it, because he gave her a communication device so that she could contact him at any time. Raising his mug of coffee, the crown prince added that he too was glad that the countess was on the mend. Embarrassed, Hilda looked in surprise at the crown prince sitting opposite her. And then, holding the mug in her lap, she lowered her head, not knowing what else to say, and at that moment she heard the man say that he had to go. The crown prince added that she should also rest. The girl, who did not expect this, raised her head and thought that in her thoughts they should have discussed the terms of the contract. The man, already standing up and turning his back, added that he did all this without expecting anything in return. And then he asked her not to misunderstand him, because his feelings for her remained the same. Looking at the girl who approached, the crown prince said that he needed her, but if they made a hasty decision under the influence of what was happening, then perhaps there would be no turning back. He asked Hilda to think about it seriously when everything calmed down. Hearing this, Miss Bailey looked at him in surprise, and at that time she thought that sometimes he made her heart beat faster. At that moment, the girl remembered their first meeting and his deceptive actions. And then, thinking about how worried the crown prince had been during their current meeting, she realized that he was now trying to respect her decisions. She also realized that the man took her feelings into account. The girl thought that even though the crown prince had all the power to make her obey with just one order, he did not do so, and she replied that she appreciated his words. And then Hilda added that she had already made a decision, although she was frightened by such a generous offer. Pressing her hand to her chest, the girl added that if His Highness still wanted it, she would gladly agree to his proposal. Hearing these words from Lady Bailey, the man looked at her with wide eyes in surprise. After this, the crown prince turned to the girl and knelt down in front of her. Taking Hilda by the hand, the man said that since their first meeting had not been a success, he would not claim to be a good husband. And then, leaning towards her hand to kiss it, he added that he was an ordinary man. After that, looking at Hilda, the crown prince said that, given his position, she and her abilities were too good for him. The girl, having heard all this, only looked at the man with embarrassment. Hilda suddenly felt that there was so much tenderness and warmth in this conversation, but no love at all. Standing in front of the girl, the man waved his hand, summoned a piece of paper, and said that he would draw up a draft of the contract. As a result, when discussing marriage, they excluded all feelings from it and spelled out in detail the conditions and benefits for each party. This agreement was a clean, mutually beneficial deal. The crown prince, holding the paper in his hands, said that he had sketched out a draft, but they would not sign it right away. The man suggested that they begin to gradually implement the conditions and sign them just before the wedding. Hilda agreed, taking the contract in her hands. After saying goodbye, he suggested discussing the details tomorrow, or rather today, to which he received a positive response. Having said this, the man summoned a magic circle, leaving the surprised girl to silently stare at the place where he had just stood. Meanwhile, the crown prince's assistant, Jerfel Rose, was sitting in his office. He studied the papers spread out around him with concentration, and then a magic circle suddenly appeared on the floor. And when the crown prince appeared in it, the assistant noticed that he had returned. His Highness went into the room, and Jerfel asked where he had gone. Taking off his robe, the man replied that he had visited one place. The assistant, with a displeased look, told the crown prince that this was not just any place, but that he had visited the Bailey estate. While handing the clothes to the prince, the young man asked why he was doing this, since there was a lot of work to do today, to which the man replied that it was his job to sort everything out. His Highness, having taken off his household things, threw on a shirt. And then, while tightening the laces in front, he thought about something for a moment. When the crown prince was fully dressed, the aide suddenly asked how everything had gone at the Bailey estate. He was very interested in whether his master had achieved what he wanted. Hearing this question, the crown prince turned around and looked at the young man with displeasure. Looking at his assistant, His Highness thought that he had made the right choice. Jerfel, smiling, said that his master looked pleased, to which he replied that it was impossible to propose to a person you didn't love. Then the young man looked questioningly at His Highness and said that anything could be expected from him. Raymond did not respond to his assistant's words. After all, he had long ago abandoned the idea of marrying for love, and for him, marriage was just a means for developing the empire. The main thing was that the candidate met the requirements, and who exactly would become it did not matter. And whoever she was, he would honestly fulfill his duties as a husband. But then, when they brought him the sewn gloves, he realized something. Holding the glove in his hands, he realized that although it looked simple and ordinary, there was an unusual sophistication about it. And this vague feeling became certainty when he saw the girl in person. Even in that dress, which she apparently sewed herself, the same talent that he felt in the gloves was noticeable. A noblewoman of no noble birth with an unremarkable origin, but possessing a unique gift. The man remembered her response when she said that she appreciated his words, but had already made her decision and gratefully agreed, and he realized that she had a backbone. Approaching the window, the crown prince asked himself how he could resist temptation here. After all, there were unexpected sides to this girl. Namely, what she did to save her mother. Few aristocrats feel such affection for their parents. His Highness smiled, deciding that he was impressed. His assistant, looking at the gentleman's back, asked if he had fallen in love with Lady Bailey. Turning around, the crown prince looked at the young man with displeasure and replied that this was nonsense. To this, the assistant remarked that it seemed to him that His Highness was digging a hole for himself. Angered, the crown prince said that it was enough to discuss this topic. Sensing the displeasure in the crown prince's voice, Jerfel asked for forgiveness. His Highness ordered him to focus on preparing for the Foundation Festival, as that was where they would announce their engagement. To this, the young man replied that he understood everything and would take care of distributing the budget for the wedding and other expenses. And when the crown prince said that they would discuss the details later, and in 3 days he would go to her again, the assistant clarified whether he would ride a horse or move. After these words, he informed the crown prince that business awaited him and quickly ran out of the office. As his assistant left the office, Raymond thought about what he had said, that he had fallen in love with Lady Bailey. He thought it was all nonsense, and he just wanted to do the best he could for her. He remembered that he had given up the idea of marrying for love, but he did not want to deprive the girl of that too, and so he decided to play the role of a loving husband as best he could. Having decided everything for himself, the man began to sort through the papers that lay on his desk and required immediate attention. Hilda was sleeping soundly in her bed that morning. It was very difficult for her to get up. She fell asleep only in the morning, looking after her mother. Hearing a knock on the door, the girl thought that she had asked not to wake her up until lunch and asked why so early. Hearing the voice that said that he couldn't choose a dream, the girl opened her eyes wide. After all, the crown prince entered her room and added that he really wanted to see his bride. Then he sat down on the couch next to the bed, and the girl covered herself with a blanket. She was shocked that he came so early, when she was still asleep. As Hilda handed the man coffee, she said she knew they would see each other today, but she didn't expect it to happen so early. Sitting down opposite the man, she thought that the situation was repeating itself, and the crown prince apologized because he thought that she had already woken up. When His Highness stood up, the girl was very surprised and wondered why he did it. Realizing that he had decided to move in next to her, the girl was slightly embarrassed. Although they were engaged, it was only on paper. And the crown prince, smiling, asked the girl if they could continue their conversation from yesterday. Hilda answered positively and added that this was why he came. Looking at the girl, the man addressed her by name. Hearing this, she looked at him in surprise. Smiling at Hilda, His Highness asked if she could call him by his first name. The girl was shocked because she didn't expect that a man could ask such a thing. and His Highness, still smiling, explained that they would have to convince the public after the sudden announcement of the engagement. He added that people love romance, and if they said that they had loved each other for a long time, people would believe it, to which he received a positive response. When the girl asked him how their love story came about, the man replied that something simple would do. His Highness suggested that he say that while hiding his identity, he had met her by chance several years ago, and that they soon fell deeply in love. They were happy, but then the girl found out who he really was and, wanting a quiet life, left him. But the Crown Prince could not forget Hilda, and after long courtship she finally accepted him. Taking the girl by the hand, His Highness asked, "Wasn't it so?" Having kissed the girl's hand, he addressed her by name. Hilda was shocked. He didn't ask her opinion, but seemed to insist that everything was exactly like that. Still holding her hand in his, the man added that if they started calling each other by name, there would be no turning back. He explained that a normal political engagement could be broken off by citing inconsistency of conditions, but if they said they had loved each other for years, it would not be so easy to get out of it. And then he added that this could damage the girl's reputation. Hilda bowed her head and thanked the man for his concern. And then, placing her other hand on his palm, she added that she had already decided everything. Closing her eyes and lowering her head, the girl called the Crown Prince by name. Raymond looked at Hilda in surprise. He didn't expect her to agree. Smiling at the girl, he also called her by name. At this time, Hilda was thinking that she should not be deceived. They were bound by a contract, and his kindness was only part of the conditions, nothing more. But sometimes the daughter of the Earl of Bailey was lost by his beauty. She understood that this was only because she was not used to male attention. And then Hilda said there was something else she wanted to ask. The man looked at her with a warm smile and said that she could speak. The girl asked, a little timidly, whether the Crown Prince could provide her with immunity. His Highness looked at Hilda in surprise, not understanding why she needed immunity, and then he asked the girl what exactly she meant. Hilda thought that the conditions he proposed were simple: to fulfill the duties of the Crown Princess and use her sewing skills, namely, to raise the level of clothing and textiles in the Lumina Empire to the level of other countries, if not higher. Although there is peace in the empire now, it once lived in constant wars until the current emperor came to power, but now this peace has begun to turn into boredom. People were hungry for something new and exciting, and Raymond decided that culture would be the heart of this new excitement. With the girl's skills and knowledge, there will be no serious obstacles in the development of the imperial clothing industry. The problem was that if she accepted this offer, she would have to continue lying to him. Hilda realized that she would not be able to say where she had actually learned to sew, but added out loud that she was determined to fulfill her duties as Crown Princess. And then the girl added that she was only human, and one day she could make a fatal mistake that would cost her her life. At that moment, the girl remembered a scene from her childhood, namely how the Crown Prince's uncle was hanged on the wall. Then she said that if that happened, she wanted to have the right to be forgiven. His Highness looked at the girl in surprise and listened to what she said. And then, snapping his fingers, the man said he would add an immunity clause to the contract. The Crown Prince added that he did not know why she needed it, but hoped that she would not take it as permission to act recklessly. The girl responded that she had not thought about it. She was just a little scared. Hearing that Hilda was a little scared, the Crown Prince sadly replied that he understood her. And then the man suggested moving on to the rest of the terms of the contract. After they discussed everything, Raymond said goodbye and said that they would see each other in 3 days. Turning around and looking at the girl, the Crown Prince asked if she was sure she could handle it, since there were only 2 weeks left until the founding celebration. After all, she still had to sew her dress and his gloves, and after thinking about it, Hilda replied that she would have time. Smiling, the girl assured the prince that everything would be ready on time. She also added that she now has a lot of determination. Looking at Hilda, His Highness suddenly asked if this was all she was worried about now. Seeing the confusion on the girl's face, he explained that she was getting married. She had to make an official introduction and announce her engagement in front of everyone, and she was only worried about sewing. To this, the girl replied that most likely she had not yet fully realized everything. Having said that there was no need to see him off, the man added that if that was the case, he would trust her, and the girl, having said goodbye, said that they would see each other in 3 days. When the Crown Prince began to cast spells again, the girl understood why she shouldn't see him off. Just like last time, he disappeared, leaving her looking at the place where he had just been. Hilda watched in amazement as a pillar of light carried Raymond away from her house. The girl, hitting herself on the forehead, decided that she should not be mistaken. After all, this was just his duty. She remembered how the Crown Prince had hugged her and kissed her on the forehead before he disappeared. Sitting on the floor and covering her face with her hands, she scolded herself for imagining too much. 3 days later, the bright sun shone on the Earl of Bailey's mansion. Half asleep, Hilda sat in bed and could not force herself to wake up. With difficulty lowering her legs to the floor and trying to get up, the girl thought that it was time to get up. After all, His Highness would arrive today. Somehow reaching the mirror, she looked into it and was unpleasantly surprised by what she saw. After all, her appearance was terrible. She was too carried away by sketches after a long break, and she also wanted to show him the gloves. Seeing the glow of the magic circle, the girl realized that the prince would soon be here. She was horrified because her head was a complete mess. And then the prince appeared in the magic circle along with his assistant. Dropping to the floor, Raymond greeted Hilda by name, while his assistant merely bowed. The girl at this time was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket so that no one could see her. Without turning around, she greeted the men and noticed that they had arrived very early. And then Hilda added that she was not quite ready yet, which surprised the Crown Prince and made the assistant laugh. Hearing Jair's disguised laughter, His Highness turned around and looked at him with displeasure. Suddenly, the girl, hidden under the blanket, heard the Crown Prince order someone to come out, and for some reason she thought that this was said to her. Hilda said that this was her room, but if His Highness said so, then she would leave, and already heading for the exit, she heard that this was not said to her. And then, unexpectedly, the Crown Prince grabbed his assistant by the scruff of the neck. Holding the young man like that, Raymond put his hand to his chest and apologized to the girl. As the door closed behind him, Hilda wondered if this was normal or not. The Crown Prince, leaving the room, threw his assistant to the floor, and then, looking menacingly at him, he ordered him to forget what he had seen. He folded his arms across his chest and leaned over Jerfel and told him to erase it from his memory, which surprised him greatly since he did not understand how to do this. When the Crown Prince suggested to tear out his eyes, the young man quickly replied that he had already forgotten everything, and then suddenly the door of the girl's room opened. Hilda looked out from there and said with a smile that now we could come in. When the men entered, the girl apologized to the Crown Prince as she was not fully prepared, to which the man remarked that he should have told her. Turning around, Hilda looked at His Highness because she did not understand what he was supposed to tell her. And then it suddenly dawned on her that he could have warned her via transmitter. And then she apologized for not understanding, to which the Crown Prince replied that it was his own fault for not explaining in advance how to check messages. Suddenly the man saw a box lying on the table and asked if these were his gloves, to which he received a positive answer. Opening the box, the girl said that she made them adjustable, just in case. As she handed Raymond the gloves, she added that he would need to tell her if he felt uncomfortable somewhere. When the man saw these gloves, he was very surprised and said that they were amazing. And then he asked Hilda if he could try them on. Taking out the glove, His Highness carefully put it on his hand. Having done this, the Crown Prince realized that the glove fit perfectly and was very comfortable. He also realized that he could move his fingers completely freely, especially in the area of the thumb. Pointing to this part, he asked if she had sewn it separately on purpose, to which the girl replied that she thought it would be more comfortable this way. And then she explained that thanks to this, there is no pressure between the thumb and index finger, and it becomes easier to move the hand. The man was surprised because usually the thumb is not sewn on separately, and who would have thought that this would change the comfort of the gloves so much? The Crown Prince also asked what was inside, since the fabric was not itchy at all, to which the girl replied that she had carefully ironed the seam allowances on both sides. Hilda also reinforced the seams to prevent the fabric from fraying. The Crown Prince's assistant was very surprised and asked if this really helps to avoid shedding, and the girl, smiling, replied that it does not completely, but significantly reduces the likelihood. The Crown Prince was impressed and guessed that such work had taken a long time. His assistant remarked that when there was such a skilled craftsman, the court tailors could resign. The girl, who was watching the men, asked His Highness if the glove was too tight. To this, the man replied that the glove fits perfectly and everything is sewn beautifully. And then he asked if it would be possible to embroider his coat of arms on gloves next time. At that moment, the girl realized that in gratitude she had embroidered Baron Rigel's coat of arms. Looking at the man and blushing slightly, Hilda thought that perhaps she had gone too far this time. The Crown Prince and his assistant approached the girl closer. And then His Highness said that he would take the meaning of this coat of arms as a sign that he should repent for having deceived her. Hearing these words, Hilda was very surprised because His Highness accepted it so easily. The girl blushed, embarrassed, and the Crown Prince said that he had not yet introduced someone to her. He pointed to the young man who was following him and said that this was his assistant, Jerfel Rose, and the young man added that if she had any questions about the founding celebration and the wedding, she should not hesitate to contact him at any time. And then smiling, Jerfel called her Milady. The girl was very surprised that he was already calling her Milady. And then he added that on the wedding day, he would pay special attention to her makeup so that even if she blushed, it would not be noticeable. And suddenly, unexpectedly, the young man exclaimed as if he was in pain. For being too talkative, the Crown Prince stepped on his assistant's foot to stop him from talking nonsense. The girl watched the men arguing with a smile. Hearing the unusual sound, they suddenly looked at the girl in surprise, stopping arguing. At this moment, Hilda could no longer restrain herself and, covering her mouth with her hand, laughed. His Highness thought at that moment that the girl had finally begun to relax a little, and then, looking at the assistant, he decided that he could also be useful. While Jerfel stood with his nose in the air and a satisfied look on his face, the girl took out some papers and asked the men to look at them. She said that there, she sketched out the dress for the foundation's celebration. Having shown them the sketches, the girl asked whether to choose light shades or whether it would be better to look at red, to which the Crown Prince replied that it would be better to choose red. The man explained that the red color would perfectly highlight the color of her hair. Hearing these words, the girl looked at the Crown Prince in surprise and became embarrassed again. A little timidly, she asked for help in getting her some red velvet, as it would go perfectly with the holiday theme, to which she received a positive response. Then she asked to prepare something else and added that thanks to their help, she would definitely have time to sew the dress in time for the holiday. Putting the sheets on the table, Hilda said that she couldn't wait to get to work. Hearing this, the man replied that he was glad to hear it. And then, an unexpected thought suddenly came into the Crown Prince's head. Here, addressing the girl by name, His Highness asked her something. Namely, did she tell the Countess about their engagement? Turning around and looking at the Crown Prince, the girl suddenly froze in horror. After all, she completely forgot to tell her mother that she was engaged to the Crown Prince. Moreover, Mother had not even been interested in this in recent days. After hearing the girl's answer, His Highness said that he understood everything. She remembered how the other day Lucy asked who exactly helped her with her mother's treatment, but the girl joked that she would tell her later. With her head down, Hilda thought about how she had hidden the truth about His Highness from everyone in the mansion, and how she could tell them everything now. And then she heard the Crown Prince suggest that she visit her mother today and explain everything. The girl agreed to this proposal with relief. When they entered the Countess's bedroom, she apologized for receiving guests lying down. Sitting up in bed, the woman said she had heard that he had helped her with her treatment. The Crown Prince replied that he had only done what he thought was necessary and did not deserve thanks. When the mother did not understand the man's answer, she turned to her daughter, asking who this man was. Closing her eyes, the girl replied that this was the one she was going to get engaged to. And then, pointing to the man, she said that this was His Imperial Highness, Crown Prince Raymond Glitzen, and he, putting his hand to his chest, said that it was an honor for him to meet Countess Bailey. The woman was shocked by the news that he was the Crown Prince. Hilda was very worried about her mother and hoped that the surprise would not cause her to have a stroke. Countess Bailey closed her eyes and said that everything became clear to her. And then, slightly pulling the blanket up, she turned to His Highness and asked that since he had come here today, it meant that he wanted to secure her blessing for the marriage. Hearing these words, Raymond replied that this was absolutely true. The woman said with a sad smile that she was very sorry. As Hilda rushed towards her, not understanding what was happening, the woman took her daughter's hand in her own. Stroking the girl on the cheek, the Countess said that the most precious thing in this world is her daughter. And then, looking at the Crown Prince, she replied that that was why she would not give her blessing. Raymond and Hilda looked at the Countess in surprise, not expecting such words from her. The Count Bailey's mansion still stood under the blue sky, oblivious to what was happening inside it. The crown prince asked the woman in surprise if it was because she didn't like him. The countess replied that it was not a question of whether she liked him or not, and that it was not for her to decide. Then the man asked her to tell him the reason for the refusal. The woman, closing her eyes, said that he had not done the most important thing. Hilda looked at her mother in surprise, not understanding what she meant. But His Highness at that moment, lowering his head, said that he understood. And then the man suddenly stood up and, dropping to one knee, addressed the girl by name. With a slight smile, he extended his hand towards Hilda. The girl looked at him in surprise because she didn't yet understand what was happening. But putting her hand in his, she decided to trust the man. And His Highness said that he asked for the hand of Lady Hildegard of the House of Bailey and wanted to become her only companion in life. After these words, the man kissed the girl's hand. Then he looked at the countess and asked her to give him her blessing. The woman watched with a kind smile as the crown prince asked for her daughter's hand in marriage. Hilda finally realized at that moment that Raymond had asked for permission first, and that was the basis of all things. That's why her mother said that he didn't do the most important thing. Then she decided to say something too and turned to her mother. Hilda, placing her hand on her chest, said that she too wanted to receive her blessing. Hearing this, the countess only smiled a sad smile. The woman said that she had a lot of questions and wanted to say a lot, but she was afraid that she would only confuse the girl's feelings, so she asked permission to ask just one thing. Looking at her daughter, she asked if she would be happy. In response, Hilda looked at her mother in surprise. She thought that her words sounded like a spell to her, like something imprinted on her soul. She remembered that her name meant happiness, and in that moment she felt that she could let go of her anxiety and sadness, and since she had made a choice, it was better not to be afraid, but to seek the path to happiness. Smiling happily and closing her eyes, the girl answered her mother that she would definitely be happy, because no one knew how it would all end. With tears in her eyes, the countess replied that if this was her daughter's wish, then she gave her blessing. After these words, Hilda hugged her mother tightly. 3 days later, servants met them at the threshold of the new mansion. As Hilda, Countess Bailey, and the maid Lucy stepped out of the carriage, the servants outside the capital's mansion greeted them. This was one of the conditions of the contract, and Raymond gave her new lands as he promised. She remembered his assistant saying that they could keep the old properties, but he would advise selling them. Smiling, Jerfel added that the land in the new region was much better and, moreover, closer to the capital. It may sound a bit mercenary, but it was a good reason, and after discussing everything with my mother, they decided to get rid of the old lands. Her mother said that she had a lot of memories of the girl's father associated with this place, and it was the ancestral home of the Bailey family, so she was sad, but her daughter chose a difficult path. And then she added that she might need to take a decisive step to become more confident. And then she added that it would be better if her daughter had no reason to look back. Hilda didn't tell her mother how she met Ray or what exactly connected them, but the Countess pushed her daughter forward as if she already knew everything. It was as if she was saying, "Leave regret behind." And so, having generously paid the servants severance pay and given each of them a small handmade souvenir, the girl finally left her native lands. And only one person from the old servants went with them. It was the maid Lucy, who, before she had time to enter the bedroom, was delighted with the 4-poster bed. The girl thought that it was this maid who refused the severance pay and followed her. Hilda suddenly asked Lucy if she was sure and if she would regret going after her, to which the maid exclaimed that she could not regret it. And then the maid explained that if Hilda hadn't taken her in when she was an orphan, she would have ended up in a brothel, and so she couldn't leave her. And she added that the salary in the imperial palace was higher. Hilda looked at her with a smile and thought that if Lucy was happy, then that was enough for her. Walking along the corridors of the new mansion, the girl thought that it was very good that the maid stayed with her. After all, the capital still frightened Hilda, but she tried not to give in to fear. And suddenly, seeing something ahead, the girl froze. She stopped in her tracks because there was an elaborately embroidered tapestry hanging on the wall. It was the same tapestry that she had seen at Baron Rigel's. She remembered how the crown prince had asked her if she liked it, and she thought that he had sent it after all. At that moment, Hilda thought that although their relationship was secured by a contract, the man was sincerely trying for her, so she could not remain in fear forever. The next morning, the girl was very surprised when she woke up. After all, the crown prince was standing in her bedroom, holding a cup of tea on a tray. The girl was shocked to see him again in her bedroom in the morning. Covering herself with a blanket, she said that he had caught her in an inappropriate state again, to which the man replied that he had woken up early and decided to take a look. When Hilda suggested that they could have waited in the waiting room, or at least not shown up so suddenly, Ray replied that he simply wanted to see her as soon as possible, since it had been a long time since their last meeting. Taking a cup of tea from the tray, the girl asked His Highness not to do this again, to which she received a positive answer. And then, leaning towards her, the man said that she had just called him His Highness. Taking a sip from her cup of tea, the girl gasped. The Crown Prince, folding his arms across his chest, asked her to say it as it should be. Embarrassed and with her head down, the girl called him by name and thought that she was embarrassed to say it out loud. Taking the empty cup from the girl's hands, the man praised her, saying that she was a good girl. Smiling his beautiful smile, His Highness called the girl by name. And then he added that she looked great today too. Then His Highness said that he would now call the maids, and also that he did not have time to choose decorations, and he took what was at hand. Suddenly the Crown Prince looked at Hilda with concern and asked if something was bothering her. The girl looked at the man in surprise, because she didn't expect him to notice it. She didn't answer, she just looked at Raymond silently. After all, there was actually a reason why she rushed to move to the capital. She remembered how they stood before the thrones on which the Emperor and Empress sat in their throne room. Raymond turned to his father and mother and asked for their blessing, namely, a blessing to take Countess Hildegard Bailey as a wife. The girl stood behind the Crown Prince's right shoulder and looked at his parents with some fear. For a while, the Emperor and Empress were silent, and Hilda thought that they might not permit their marriage. But then their Majesties smiled and said that they were giving permission for the marriage. Smiling, His Highness thanked his parents, and the girl, seeing this, was surprised. After all, she didn't think that everything would turn out so easy. The Empress stood up and thanked Hilda, as she had been worried that Raymond had shown no interest in anyone for so long. Taking the girl by the hands, she added that, it turns out, all this time her son had a lover whom he secretly took care of. The Emperor added that it seemed to him that he had been wrong in introducing different young ladies to him every year, and although she might have her faults, he hoped that she would take good care of his son. For Hilda, all this was a bit unexpected, but she thanked His Majesty. The girl still couldn't believe that everything could be so simple. Raymond turned to his parents and asked if they could go, as they had to prepare to present the lady at the founding celebration. His father, frowning, replied that they might go, and then, turning to Raymond, added that he must never treat a lady with disdain. Bowing his head, the Crown Prince replied that he would keep that in mind. And now they are already walking along the corridors of the Imperial Palace. Hilda asked Raymond if he had by any chance asked for the Emperor and Empress's blessing in advance, which surprised him greatly. To this question, the Crown Prince answered in the negative and added that he simply told Jerfel to tell them that he would bring his bride today. Smiling, the girl replied that she understood everything. She was just a little confused, because his parents didn't even need to be persuaded. They gave their blessing completely sincerely. To this, the man replied that his marriage had been quite a headache for them, since they had been trying to find him a bride for years. The girl, looking at the Crown Prince, wondered why they were so worried. Looking at Raymond, Hilda wondered if it was possible to find someone more perfect and worthy, and she would never have thought that the question of marriage could be a problem for him. Suddenly a maid came out to meet them and bowed to His Highness. The Crown Prince, however, remained silent in response and looked at her with a frown. Seeing the Crown Prince's gaze, the maid was very frightened, and after that she quickly ran further down the corridor. Hilda, seeing all this, was very surprised. At this time, Raymond asked her how she had managed to get to the capital, to which the girl replied that everything had gone smoothly thanks to his care, and thanked her for the outfits. She said that before they came here, she was given a tour of the capital. When she asked if it was his idea, he replied yes. When they entered the living room, the girl froze in admiration. Seeing the room and all the furnishings, she could only think how beautiful it was. Suddenly the girl thought that, as expected, the Crown Prince had excellent taste in decoration. Suddenly, His Highness stopped and watched the girl who walked forward. For a while he looked after her with a thoughtful gaze. And then the man suddenly said that he thought about it as soon as he saw her. And when Hilda looked back, His Highness added that she looked even more beautiful today. Raymond said that the dress she was wearing could not fully show off her beauty. Offering the girl a seat, he said that after the Foundation's celebration, he would order custom-made outfits for her. Hilda was in shock. She knew that the crown prince was generous with compliments, but now it was too much. She was scared to hear such words, and from a handsome man. When Raymond said that he would have tea served to them, the girl agreed. Sometime later, sitting at the set table, the crown prince asked whether Hildegard had received the materials, to which the girl replied that she had received everything, had just finished the pattern, and was about to start embroidering. Handing the girl the cake, Raymond asked in surprise if she was almost finished, to which Lady Bailey replied that she had finished most of it on the way to the capital. When Hilda said that it would soon be possible to try on the finished dress, His Highness thought with a smile that she was truly amazing. After all, the dress that she recently showed him, with a tunic inside, like 2 outfits in one, she made in a very short time. Watching the girl eat the cake, Raymond admired the fact that she was able to work even on the road. At this moment, the crown prince, addressing the girl by name, said that he had something to tell her, which surprised her greatly. The man explained that guests from all countries would gather at the founding celebration, and among them would be representatives of the Trigo Kingdom, the most advanced country in the textile industry. He added that Prince Aidan of Trigo was very interested in this craft and was a master at it. And then he asked Hilda not to come near him under any circumstances. The crown prince explained that the prince would certainly want to have her for himself. The Bailey family's new mansion stood under a blue sky, and screams could be heard inside, and all this happened the day before the founding celebration. It was Lucy, with her hands on her hips, scolding her mistress for not getting enough sleep. The sleep-deprived girl with large circles under her eyes noticed that she had almost finished the dress. To this, the maid said that the holiday was tomorrow, and what should they do if she looked exhausted? Lucy, combing her mistress's hair, added that even in the old estate she had not allowed herself such a thing, and had overdone it too much. Turning to the maid, Hilda said that she would be able to sleep well today, and that was why she had been toiling all night. Suddenly, Lucy said that she was very upset, and asked her mistress if she really had to get married. Suddenly, they heard a voice that said it sounded scary, and turning around, they saw the crown prince. Lucy suddenly hiccuped in fright, and Hilda reminded Raymond that she had asked him not to appear suddenly. And then, putting her hand on the maid's shoulder, the girl asked why he came just when she was not ready yet. Having calmed down, Lucy walked over to the other servants and bowed to the crown prince. At this time, the girl thought about whether magic should not be a secret and whether it could be used so calmly. Raymond suddenly asked the girl if she was overtired. Turning to the mirror, Hilda replied that everything was fine and that it was not the first time she had not slept all night. Taking the jewelry from the girl's hands, he told her that it was not good to lie. While fastening the decoration on Hilda's neck, the man added that he had not proposed so that she would torment herself. Lady Bailey looked at him, and His Highness continued that he valued her skills, but as his wife, she should enjoy what she did and enjoy life. The girl, looking at Raymond, thought that he called her his future wife. And then, getting up from her chair and clearing her throat, she said that she wanted him to stop finding her looking untidy, to which the man replied that he could not promise that. When Hilda asked why, the crown prince laughed and said that after the wedding they would share the same bed, and therefore it was impossible. The girl was shocked when she heard Raymond's answer. Hilda thought that for all 40-odd years of her life, including the past, these words had always seemed like something far away to her. It wasn't that the girl didn't know anything about it, she just had never had such an experience. Seeing the girl's reaction, Raymond looked at her with bewilderment. Thinking that she couldn't even imagine such a thing, Hilda asked for a minute. Clutching her head in her hands, she thought about how they had never even talked about it, and she believed that since they had an arranged marriage, this topic would never come up. Looking at herself in the mirror, the girl was surprised why she turned all red, as if she was screaming about how much this embarrassed her. Raymond suddenly apologized and said that he only wanted to say that they would have to share a room. To this, the girl replied that since they were getting married soon, it was logical that they would have to live together. Completely embarrassed, she thought that she didn't know what to say because she was so ashamed. So she smiled and said that the dress was almost ready and asked if he would like to look at it. Hearing this question, the man answered positively, and so, walking side by side, they left the girl's room together. Some time later, the prince returned to his office. There he was met by an assistant who was surprised that his master had returned so early. Jerfel asked Raymond if he had seen the dress yet, to which the man, walking to his chair, replied that it was impeccable. The assistant smiled and said that this was expected because he knew that Lady Bailey could handle it. Noticing the gentleman's gaze, he asked in surprise why he was looking at him like that. Had he really done something wrong again? At this time, His Highness was thinking about the dress that the girl showed him. He remembered her saying that the dress had a slit that revealed delicate embroidery on the lining. At that moment, His Highness was speechless and only regretted that he could not find the words to describe it. Looking at his assistant, he thought that if he had been there, he would certainly have showered him with praise. And then, sitting down in a chair at the table, the man thought about one more thing. Covering his face with his hand, he remembered what he already knew. She was innocent. And also the fact that Lady Bailey had no relations with men. And when the Crown Prince said that after the wedding they would share the same bed, he did not expect her to be so ignorant. He realized that this was a problem, because one careless touch of his to Hilda and Jerfel and her mother would nag him for the rest of his life. Suddenly the Crown Prince stood up and addressed his assistant by name, and then, looking at him seriously, he asked to follow him tomorrow, meaning Aiden, to which he received a positive answer. His Highness added that there was no one in the entire world with the skills that Lady Bailey had. Frowning, His Highness ordered his assistant not to allow him to encroach on her under any circumstances. And so the day of the founding celebration arrived. The whole city was decorated with flags and flowers. This founding celebration begins with a ceremonial ceremony. Namely, the emperor will greet the nobility of the empire and honored guests from all lands. Only titled nobles and invited guests may participate in this ceremony, so Hilda will only join after it is completed. This is because she has not yet become part of the imperial family and has not inherited the title of count. Suddenly, an assistant approached His Highness from behind and called him. He informed his master that Her Highness had arrived. The girl, wrapped in a cloak, thought that she was very worried, but she would succeed. She remembered how Lucy and her mother gave her gloves, saying that they made them together. The Countess said it was important to have the right mindset in such cases, Lucy added, and her mother said she just needed to imagine them there. The girl thought that she could feel their support right now, and suddenly she saw Jerfel running towards her. When he reached Hilda and caught his breath a little, he said that he would take her to His Highness, and the girl thanked him in response. To this, the young man replied that if she wanted to thank him, she should ask Raymond to soften his punishment, which greatly surprised the girl, because she did not know that he was punished. At this time, the Crown Prince was nervously walking near the door, waiting for Hilda to approach. Hearing the sound of approaching footsteps, the man turned around. He saw his assistant holding the cloak and Hilda curtsying before him. Looking up at the Crown Prince, the girl was shocked at how handsome he was. His Highness was thinking the same thing, that Hilda was even more dazzling than usual. Putting his arm around the girl's waist from behind, the man reminded her of what they had agreed on. Namely, that he uses a little magic to make her shine, so he asked her not to be afraid. After this, the girl took His Highness by the arm, and the doors in front of which they stood began to open. When the steward announced that His Highness Raymond Glitzen and Lady Hildegard of House Bailey were entering, all the nobles present were surprised. The man and the girl entered the hall, looking at each other and shining with a dazzling light. Although the girl was a little scared, she was dazzlingly beautiful. The nobility of the empire remembered that the founding holiday was associated with one tradition, which had its roots in the myth of the creation of the empire. Namely, that the emperor's first victory in battle was achieved thanks to gloves sewn by his wife's hands, because they brought him good luck. Since then, every year on the day of the foundation, members of the imperial family give their spouses or loved ones a pair of gloves they sewed themselves. This tradition confirms the strength of the imperial dynasty and symbolizes the ruler of the continent. The nobles, seeing the prince's gloves, began to whisper that they looked magnificent. The girls also noticed Lady Hildegard's dress, which also looked magnificent. The Crown Prince, who had come out onto the balcony with Lady Bailey, said that he had a statement for everyone gathered and that he wished to fulfill his duty on the day of the founding of the Luminance Empire. And then the man added that he vowed eternal love to Lady Hildegard Bailey in the coming year. All the nobility were surprised. They could not believe that the Crown Prince was actually going to get married. Some of them wondered if the Earl Bailey family even existed and where this young lady came from. At that moment, Prince Aiden of Trigo looked closely at the couple standing on the balcony. The man was thoughtful because he too was interested in where this lady came from. After this announcement, the nobility continued to talk and discuss this news. When Hilda asked Raymond if she had done well, he replied that she had done wonderfully and that she would soon see for herself. After these words, the girl thought for a moment. After all, when they went down to the hall, no one approached them, and the nobility simply glanced at her from afar. When she asked the crown prince this question, he replied that it was most likely because of him. And then, looking at the girl, he added that if he stepped away for a while, someone would immediately approach her. The girl remembered that she had experienced the same strange feeling when the maid came out to meet them. At that time, the crown prince's gaze was not very friendly, and so the maid, seeing this look, was very frightened. The girl remembered that the knight whom Raymond had sent today had treated her with great respect. She looked attentively at His Highness, who was standing next to her. And then she thought that he was always so affectionate with her, but maybe with others he was not like that at all. Hilda tugged at her braid and wondered if they got married, she would ever be able to ask about it. And then Raymond suddenly asked Lady Bailey if she wanted to socialize with others, to which the girl replied that she would not refuse, because they would have to maintain social relations after the wedding. Hilda was very worried, because there would be balls in 3 more days, and she had almost no experience in such receptions. Winking at his bride, he said he would step away for a moment. Hearing these words, the girl was surprised because she did not expect the crown prince to do this. As he walked away, Raymond smiled at the girl, who was slightly frightened, being left alone. Seeing this, all the nobility were very surprised that the cold and unapproachable prince was smiling. As he walked away from the girl, Raymond glanced at his assistant, who bowed to him. And the girl smiled, because as soon as the crown prince left, the nobility surrounded her like ghosts. Everyone was wondering when they started dating His Highness, and where she got such a stunning dress. The first half of the aristocrats wanted to know the name of the fashion designer, and the second half wanted to know how she met the prince. They were unsure how to address Lady Bailey, to which Hilda laughed and replied that she had not yet received an official title, so there was no need for formalities. And then, smiling sweetly, Lady Bailey replied that she had made the dress herself. The aristocrats could not believe it, because the girl looked so naive and simple-minded, so they decided that the prince could deceive her. And only then did the girls realize that she had said that she had sewn it herself. The crown prince's aide stood close to Lady Bailey, keeping an eye on her. While the girls were admiring the dress, a frowning aristocrat suddenly approached them. And then, with an evil grin, this gentleman said that it was hard to believe that she had sewn the dress herself. He also added that a simple provincial noblewoman could not have created something like this. Hearing these words, the crown prince's assistant frowned. And His Highness, also listening to what the nobility was saying, turned around and looked to see who dared to say such a thing. Hilda was very surprised, because she had given them a clear and confident answer and did not understand what kind of tone it was. She looked at the aristocrat and wondered if he really didn't understand or was just trying to provoke her. Hilda could not know that this young nobleman had once submitted a petition to the imperial palace and had personally received a refusal from Raymond himself. Laughing, this gentleman added that he was not mistaken, and even if the dress was made by someone else and she was passing it off as her own, now she would not be able to prove otherwise. And this aristocrat also noticed that the girl looked too young to have such skills. She should have been sewing since childhood, and if the lady had been in his place, she would not have believed it so easily either. And then Hilda heard the familiar voice of the crown prince, who, turning to the man, said that he understood that it was hard to believe, but the girl had not lied to him. As he approached them, Raymond added that a striking example was these gloves, which were made by hand by his dear bride. Showing the glove and hugging the girl to himself, the crown prince added that he would not allow just anyone to sew for him. And His Highness also said that he could not remember the name of this gentleman. With these words, he angered the man. And then, having apologized, the girl turned to the aristocrat and asked him to answer her why he was so sure that this was not her work. Hilda added that if he didn't give a good reason, she would consider it an insult. To this, the aristocrat standing opposite asked if she was making a mountain out of a molehill. To this, Lady Bailey replied that he had insulted her more than once. And then the girl explained that the first time he doubted her skills, the second time he called her a liar, and the third time he humiliated her family for being provincial. Lady Bailey was angry and asked if the gentleman really believed that no one outside the capital was capable of creating something like this. Hearing all this and seeing the girl's eyes sparkle with anger, the man became frightened and said that he didn't mean it that way. Looking at the angry Lady Bailey, the aristocrats thought that spouses take on each other's traits over time. They also thought that Lady Bailey was not as naive as she seemed, and then suddenly the aristocrat, clenching his fists, asked the girl if she was ashamed. Blushing with anger, he shouted that she was a noble lady and so proud of such a low craft. Hearing these words, the crown prince was shocked and already wanted to answer something. But at that moment, Hilda went towards this aristocrat and asked him to watch his language. Standing opposite the man, the girl clenched her fists and asked him to think before speaking. Hilda added, her eyes flashing with anger, that she was a seamstress, and if the gentleman did not understand what could be said and what could not, then she would have to sew his mouth shut. Hearing these words, the nobleman even recoiled from the girl because he suddenly became afraid. And then he turned around and simply ran away, and Hilda, looking after him, thought that she didn't know why this gentleman was so hostile to her, but calling sewing a low craft was already too much. The crown prince approached the girl and, putting his hand on her shoulder, said that she was amazing. Looking at him, Lady Bailey replied that she was not serious about all this. Kissing Hilda on the forehead, he said that he always thought she was so fragile and smooth. Raymond smiled and added that he now saw a completely different side of her. Hilda was very surprised by these words and thought it was good that he did not misunderstand her. Embarrassed, the girl decided that now she didn't know how to react to this. His Highness was thinking at this time that Hilda seemed to be satisfied with everything, and then he noticed the nobleman who ran away from the girl and was in a hurry to leave the hall. His gaze immediately changed at that moment. It became cold and angry. Looking at his assistant, he ordered him with his eyes to do something, namely, to find out everything about this nobleman, since it was unlikely that this was the first time he had caused a scandal, and he would not leave it like that. Raymond gave Jerfel such a sharp look that he immediately understood his master's intentions. And suddenly, Hilda heard someone ask if His Highness had really fallen in love. This was asked by a man who approached the couple and added that if Lady Bailey had not interceded herself, he would have filed a formal complaint on Trigo's behalf. Hilda saw this gentleman for the first time, but for some reason she thought that it might be His Highness Aiden. After that, the girl looked closely at the prince from the Trigo kingdom. His Highness Aiden was a tall, handsome man with dark hair. Hilda remembered the day when the Emperor and Empress gave their blessing to the marriage. It was then that Raymond revealed that he and Aiden had had a rather complicated relationship for a long time. The girl was surprised because Jerfel told her that they were close, and therefore she thought that they were friends. She explained that his assistant had said this when they had come to look at the gloves, and he had said that it was important for her to know. When Hilda asked Raymond why she and Aiden were not on good terms, the man covered his face with his hand and thought that Jerfel was a little rascal. The crown prince realized that his assistant had said that on purpose because he knew about his plan, but he did not understand why it was necessary to use such a formulation and decided that he would not forgive him for it. When Raymond explained that none of the things Jerfel had told her had happened between him and Aiden, the girl realized that he really seemed to hate him. And then His Highness said that even before his father ascended the throne, wars did not stop. And when the conflict had already dragged on for too long, a treaty was signed between the countries. One of the conditions of this treaty was the obligation of the heirs to the thrones of all countries, upon reaching a certain age, to study at the academy in the center of the continent. Hearing this, Hilda asked if they had met Prince Aiden there, to which she received a positive answer. The textile industry flourished in the kingdom of Trigo, and every time Aiden made a sarcastic remark about his clothes, Raymond said, Hilda, hearing this, did not understand what the crown prince meant when he spoke about barbs. His Highness explained that although he did not want to admit it, they unfortunately had similar tastes, and one time they wore the same tunics, and another time almost identical robes. Aiden constantly made fun of his gloves, handkerchiefs, and other clothes, as if he wanted to prove that his kingdom was superior to their empire, and because of him, Raymond had not given gloves to representatives of other countries for more than 10 years. His Highness also said that every year on the founding day, Aiden would find fault with the sewing technique and keep looking for flaws in the gloves. Hilda listened attentively as the crown prince said that he had stopped sending him invitations 3 years ago, but he still came every year. The girl understood that this was bad, but the reason for their disagreement seemed too cute to her, and she barely restrained herself from laughing. Hilda tried to control herself, but she failed, and she turned away slightly and lowered her head. Raymond, noticing this, asked why the girl's shoulders were shaking and whether she was crying. Worried about Hilda, the man looked at her with concern and stood up to approach her. But then suddenly the girl laughed, and through her laughter she asked His Highness to wait and give her a second. Having calmed down and seeing that Raymond had sat down and lowered his head, Hilda apologized because she had not meant to laugh, and the man replied that since his story had amused her, it meant that there was some value in it. The girl, wiping away the tears that had appeared from laughter, decided that it was better not to say that the reason was too sweet, but still understood something important, namely that Raymond, whom she always considered the ideal and flawless crown prince, could also be an ordinary person. Hilda also saw that he not only cared about the empire, but was also personally interested in the textile industry. Looking at His Highness, the girl thought that before she had never fully understood why he chose her, but now she got to know him a little better. And the crown prince asked Hilda to stay away from Aiden, because he would probably try to charm her. The girl, hearing this, blushed slightly and wondered if the man was jealous, but then decided that this could not be. Raymond suddenly stood up and extended his hand towards Hilda, and then he gently ran this hand over the girl's cheek and stopped at her neck. And at that moment, the man smiled and said that her face was his ideal. At the present time, Prince Aiden greeted Raymond and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. He smiled and added that this year he wanted to give him some sincere advice about gloves. And then, looking at the gloves that were on the crown prince's hands, he admitted that he couldn't. Raymond, his face darkening, suddenly asked whether these were really advice every year. And then smiling, he added that most people would call this not advice, but nitpicking. When he added that this was not just nitpicking but insults, Aiden closed his eyes and said that it hurt him to hear such words from him. Then, smiling, he asked the crown prince if his comments had not improved Raymond's gloves year after year. Aiden spread his hands and added that this was not only about the gloves even at the academy. His Highness's clothes had changed for the better thanks to him. Hilda, who was watching the conversation between the two princes, felt as if she was left alone, and Aiden at that moment told Raymond that it seemed he had found a bride because of him. Hearing this, His Highness frowned and looked at the Prince of Trigo with displeasure, and he continued to say that he could never have thought that there would be a girl who would be able to generously accept Raymond's immaturity, and he could not even imagine that she would become the crown prince's mate. Hilda, who was listening to their conversation, was shocked, and then she felt His Highness's hand rest on her waist. Raymond, pulling the girl towards him, said that she was not only generous, but also beautiful. Hilda looked at all this and wanted to cry, because two grown men were behaving like children. She felt like a kindergarten teacher caught in the middle of a squabble among teenagers. Looking back, the girl saw Jerfel standing nearby with his back to her and mentally asked him to save her, and the crown prince's assistant stood with his back turned because he couldn't hold back his laughter. At this time, Hilda heard the question that Aiden asked her about whether she had sewn the gloves for His Highness, and answered positively. And then Raymond apologized to the girl and officially introduced her to Prince Aiden of Trigo. The girl curtsied and said she was pleased to meet her, and the man bowed his head and replied that it was an honor for him. And then the Prince of Trigo asked if he could take a closer look at the gloves, if she and His Highness did not mind. Hearing this, Hilda thought that he was the first to retreat, and if a person was able to argue with Raymond on equal terms, then he was very proud. The girl realized that since Aiden didn't continue, it meant he was truly interested in how the gloves were made. Raymond didn't answer, but simply began to silently remove the glove from one hand. When Hilda asked if she could show them to him, the crown prince answered positively and added that Trigo was an allied kingdom. And then, smiling at the girl, he added that this could be useful for her future. The girl looked at His Highness with surprise, because she did not understand what he was talking about. But then it dawned on Hilda that the kingdom of Trigo was famous for its fabrics, especially velvet and gold threads. And she also remembered that the velvet from which her dress was made was also cut. And although the prince is not on the best of terms now, Geoffrey said that even in the midst of the war, the alliance between the Lumen Empire and Trigon was never broken. After the peace treaty, Lumen developed military power and squad technology, and Frigo developed textile culture, thanks to which both countries prospered together. And the main thing that Hilda remembered was that Jeff said that Raymond was generous to those who have talent. The Crown Prince's aide also told her that both princes had equally high grades at the academy, and Hilda realized that perhaps they were rivals, but also sworn enemies. At this time, Aiden looked at her gloves and asked how she came up with such an idea. He hovered over the girl and explained that he meant a separate thumb, and most people just cut out the shape of the hand, but she did it differently and he was interested in why and how. When the girl was already thinking about answering something, Raymond put his hand on Aiden's shoulder, smiled, and said that it was a state secret. The Prince of Trigo, hearing this, looked at the Crown Prince with surprise. Hilda was also surprised by Raymond's words, because she didn't think it would be a secret. Suddenly Aiden smiled and asked His Highness if he could ask a question. And then he added whether Raymond was taking revenge for everything that happened before or was being serious. Smiling ominously, the Crown Prince answered Aiden's question by saying that it was both. Hilda, listening to the men's conversation, only smiled mentally, but in her opinion, both principals behaved like little children. The second day of the banquet arrived, and as soon as Hilda entered the hall, yesterday's aristocrats approached her. Looking at the girl, they noticed that her dress was simply amazing today. The noblewomen particularly noted the exquisite decoration of the neckline and said that it was the finest work, and Hilda, having thanked them, thought that she had simply remade an old dress. The aristocrats asked the girl with admiration to tell how she did it, and added that they would like to invite her for tea before the wedding. Hilda just smiled back at them because during the second day of the banquet, she had realized several things. And then suddenly the girls heard someone come up and tell the ladies that that was all. It was Jerfel, who added with a smile that if they wanted to make an appointment with Her Highness, they should contact him. At this moment, Hilda learned that the Crown Prince's assistant had a title, and when the ladies said goodbye after Jerfel's words, she realized that his influence was much greater than she had assumed. Looking at the young man, the girl thought that she had not noticed it because of his relaxed behavior, although it was not surprising, since only high-ranking nobles could accompany members of the royal family. At this point, Aiden approached them, asking Lady Bailey if she was enjoying the banquet. And then the man added that her outfit today was also incredibly beautiful, and asked if she had embroidered the pattern on the neckline herself. Then Hilda learned the most important thing, that the prince from Trigo still wouldn't give her a break. The girl remembered that since yesterday, he had been taking every opportunity to ask her about her clothes. Hilda was amazed by his determination and obsession, and now she understood why Jerfel called him a close friend of Raymond. However, this time she was again unable to talk to Aiden, because His Highness approached them and, turning to the girl, said that His Majesty wanted to see her. Hilda was very surprised, and looking at the Crown Prince, asked whether she needed to go right now, to which she received a positive answer. Aiden, in front of whom Raymond stood, thought that he shouldn't lie so openly, because it was noticeable, and Hilda realized that the Crown Prince again did not let him approach her. And then suddenly the Prince from Trigo put his hand on His Highness's shoulder and asked him to wait a minute. Aiden leaned over him and smiled, asking if he was really going to continue in the same spirit, to which he received a positive answer. When the man said that he hadn't even done anything, Raymond replied that it wouldn't hurt to be on the safe side, and then, addressing the girl by name, His Highness took her by the shoulder and said that they needed to go. Hilda turned to look at Aiden and wondered if he really needed to go that far. She also remembered that Raymond had said that the prince from Trigo liked her face, but, to be honest, the girl didn't think that he saw a woman in her. Hilda decided this because all his questions concerned clothes and not her herself. And the girl also realized that even if Aiden had some feelings for her, it would not have mattered at all. Raymond and Hilda walked down the corridor towards the exit, and the aristocrats they encountered along the way greeted them. Lady Bailey looked at the man walking next to her and was surprised. After all, His Highness walked with his head down and his brows furrowed, and his gaze was cold. Hilda thought that she and Raymond were bound by a contract. Their relationship was mutually beneficial, and it would not be terminated. At that moment, the girl again remembered the scene from her childhood, where the prince hung his uncle on the wall. After this, Hilda decided that their contract would continue unless Raymond himself wanted to terminate it. When they went out onto the balcony, His Highness, holding the girl's hand, suddenly asked if he was going too far. Lady Bailey didn't understand what he was talking about, so Raymond explained that he was asking about his behavior towards Aiden. Surprised, Hilda replied that, to be honest, there was a reason for that. Approaching the railing, the girl added that she wondered if everything was okay, since he was a guest after all. Upon hearing this, the Crown Prince asked in surprise if she was worried about him. Hilda asked anxiously if she had interfered where she shouldn't have, to which she received a negative answer. And then, looking at the girl, the man added that her concerns were understandable, but there was nothing to worry about. Raymond explained that he and Aiden were using each other. Hilda was very surprised to hear this and asked how they did it. Raymond said that she could see that people around him considered him to be a difficult person to approach. And then the Crown Prince added that the other nobles found him too cold and menacing. And that's why even business conversations are difficult, he explained to the men. Remembering Aiden, he added that in this sense they were useful to each other, even though he made fun of him every year. His Highness explained that this allowed both of them to negotiate with important people in a more relaxed atmosphere, and both benefited. Hilda looked at the men and clarified that they were having a mutually beneficial relationship, to which Raymond agreed and added that this was how they were demonstrating to everyone how strong the alliance was between the Luminan Empire and Trigo. Smiling at him, the girl said that now everything became clear to her, and then she asked if Aiden thought the same, to which the prince answered in the affirmative and added that this is exactly why he behaves this way, although the moments where they hurt each other's pride are not feigned. Hearing this, the girl laughed and decided that they were both still cunning. To this, Raymond said that it couldn't be any other way with Aiden, because he was one of the few who made him give his all and the one who showed him what defeat tasted like. A little earlier in the banquet hall, the Prince of Trigo, addressing His Highness, said that the entire hall was talking only about their love. He smiled and added that everyone was speaking in the most exaggerated terms. To which Raymond replied that this was not an exaggeration at all, but the pure truth, while Aiden replied that he did not know that His Highness was such a romantic and that love could see the light of anyone. And then the prince from Trigo added that they say this is not just love, but a story of eternal love, to which the Crown Prince said that this is exactly so. Hearing these words, Aiden rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. And then, looking at the Crown Prince taking a sip from his glass, he added that this performance was staged very skillfully. Raymond looked back at Aiden and suddenly said that there was no point in throwing around big words based on guesswork. At the present time, His Highness told Hilda that they were old rivals and knew each other too well, and more than once they had butted heads and taken things from each other. And that's why they will never become true friends, the man added. And looking at the girl who was listening to him attentively, Raymond said that they had always competed for the same thing. The Crown Prince wondered if it might happen, although it was very unlikely, that he would suddenly truly fall in love with Hilda. And then suddenly the girl apologized, and, stretching out her hand towards the man, said that he had a speck of dust on his clothes. And then, gently touching his clothes with her hand, Hilda removed them. The man was amazed by the sensations from the girl's touch, and she removed her hands, saying that everything was okay now. Catching Hilda's hand in his, Raymond suggested going inside, to which he received a positive answer. Holding the girl's hand, the Crown Prince said that she could leave early if she was tired, to which Hilda objected, noting that it was her job. And then, smiling, Lady Bailey added enthusiastically that everything was fine and that she still needed to get used to it. Raymond looked at Hilda with concern and asked her not to overdo it. A few days later, there was a table set on the balcony and 2 chairs next to it. Hilda, turning to Raymond, said that she needed to ask him for something. The man looked at the girl in surprise, because he did not understand what she was talking about. And Hilda thought that even if it seemed strange, she could not miss such an opportunity, and said that she really wanted to do something. Some time ago, after some twists and turns, the girl successfully survived the founding celebration. She also arrived at the palace earlier than planned, Hilda recalled, sitting at the table. This was necessary in order to immediately begin preparations for the wedding, and only when she was here did she realize something, namely, how tiring and intense the role of the Crown Princess is. Traditional imperial service, tons of material to study, etiquette lessons, and as if that weren't enough, she still has to sew her own wedding dress. The girl suddenly jumped up and exclaimed with enthusiasm that since she had already decided, she had to give it her all. After thinking about it and looking at the sketches, Hilda decided that determination alone would not be enough. She was unsure if she could create a wedding dress in the style that everyone was accustomed to. The girl remembered that in this world there is no concept of a wedding dress, and usually brides just wear the best of what they have or order a new one. Hilda thought about this very hard because she wanted to sew her own dress anyway, but the girl wasn't sure if she could find snow-white fabric, and that wasn't the only problem. At this time, the maid reported to Lady Bailey that His Highness had arrived, to which Hilda replied that he should come in. Getting up from her chair and straightening her dress, which had become wrinkled from sitting for so long, the girl thought that even if she sewed a dress for herself, the groom's outfit would not match it. At that moment, Hilda imagined them together in wedding dresses and realized that they would look ridiculous. Closing her eyes, the girl tried to imagine Raymond in a modern suit because he is tall and handsome. Opening her eyes, she seemed to see a man in such a suit, and at that time Raymond asked how she slept and what she was thinking so deeply about. The girl did not answer these questions, but simply looked silently at the Crown Prince and slowly blushed. His Highness asked with concern if she was feeling well, as she looked very tired. And at that moment the girl said that she really needed to ask him for something. Hearing these words, Raymond looked questioningly at Hilda, and she thought that even if it seemed strange, she couldn't miss such an opportunity, and she said that she really wanted to do something. Hilda handed one of the sketches to Raymond. It depicted a man in a classic suit. The Crown Prince, looking closely at the drawing, said that he had never seen anything like it before. Then Raymond asked Hilda if she wanted him to wear it to the wedding, to which she replied that she was not going to make it exactly according to this pattern. And then, taking the sketch from him, she added that the style would be similar, and to herself she thought that it would be something like a tuxedo. Raymond suddenly asked that it was difficult to tell from the picture, but wouldn't it be too hard for her to sew his clothes too? Hilda replied that it probably would be so, but she still wanted to do it. And then, smiling, the girl added that, after all, this was their wedding. Hilda explained that wedding clothes are special. They symbolize the beginning of a new life, which greatly surprised Raymond. She also heard from Jerfel that he took on some of her responsibilities so that it would not be so hard for her, and smiling, she said that in gratitude she also wanted to give him a gift. The man looked at the girl silently, amazed by her attitude towards him. Jerfel, who stood behind the Crown Prince and watched them, only smiled and chuckled. Hearing this sound, Raymond looked at his assistant with displeasure, and the girl was surprised, because she did not notice him. His Majesty decided to switch Hilda's attention and, pointing to other drawings, asked if they were sketches of her dress, to which the girl answered positively and added that she had not yet decided on the style. While Lady Bailey was talking about the dress and how it might seem too provocative, the Crown Prince walked up to Jerfel and stepped on his foot. Here Hilda asked what that sound was that she had just heard, but Raymond, putting his arm around the girl's waist, asked her to show him the sketches of the dress. His Highness carefully examined the sketches of the dress that the girl had in mind. And then he said that the styles of the dresses were very unusual. At that moment, the man thought that no matter what dress she chose, it would definitely make a splash. Hilda, looking at the thoughtful Crown Prince, asked if this was too radical. Hearing this question, the man came out of his reverie and looked at the girl. And then, smiling at Hilda, he replied that everything was fine, and he wanted her to sew the most beautiful dress she could. When they moved away from the table a little, Raymond told her that many people dream of dresses like hers at the founding celebration, and that orders for copies of her dress from the banquet were coming in to ateliers across the country. Trigo also showed interest in the lace that Hilda used in the outfit, and is already trying to recreate it, His Highness added, to which the girl noted that they were probably capable of doing this, since lace can be woven by hand like knitted fabric. Taking her hand, Raymond said that thanks to her he was finally convinced of his decision. Hearing this, Hilda looked at him questioningly. And the Crown Prince, looking attentively at the girl, replied that he wanted to declare to the whole world about their ambitions. Leaning into Hilda's hand, Raymond added that he wanted their wedding to be a symbol of Luminen becoming a leader in culture and other areas. Hearing these words, the girl looked at His Highness in surprise. And then Hilda smiled slightly and thought that she was a lucky woman. The girl understood that if it had been someone else in Raymond's place, she would not have even dared to dream of such opportunities. Smiling, Hilda thanked the Crown Prince for believing in her powers. Raymond, however, looked closely at the girl and asked her to allow Gerfel to accompany her from tomorrow until the wedding. The sun was shining warmly outside the window, but Hilda did not understand this request and asked why this was necessary. His Majesty replied that his assistant would be useful in case of unforeseen situations. Although the girl did not quite understand the reason, she answered positively. Remembering that his bride had to work, the Crown Prince got ready to leave. And then the man suddenly turned around and asked Hilda if she had thought about additional conditions. When Lady Bailey asked what the terms were, Raymond reminded her of the contract they had agreed to sign before the wedding. And then he added that he thought maybe the girl would like to add something. When the man said so, Hilda remembered everything. Namely, that they agreed to implement it gradually and to sign it just before the wedding, and then she agreed. Hilda apologized and admitted that it had completely slipped her mind, to which Raymond replied that everything was fine, and if she remembered anything she wanted to add, she would just tell him. When the girl agreed to do so, the man looked at her carefully, and then he said that he was very curious about one thing, and hearing this, Hilda looked at him questioningly. And Raymond, holding out his hand to her, asked where she had learned to make the lace that was on her dress. His Highness added that the pattern was very strange and that she had brought a lot of lace with her, which surprised him greatly. The girl remembered that when she was reborn in this world and started sewing, she realized that materials and fabrics were hard to come by, so she made lace and small decorations little by little. Thinking that she could not tell the whole truth to the Crown Prince, Hilda replied that when she was little, she liked to play with threads and somehow accidentally began to weave lace. The girl told Raymond, who was looking at her, that she kept making them one after another and over time they accumulated. His Highness thought for a moment and then said that they were quite rare. The Crown Prince then asked her why she hadn't sold them to a fashion boutique, to which the girl replied that she had tried to do so. Hilda felt embarrassed to remember, but when things got bad, she went to the boutique to earn at least a little money. The owner of the boutique was delighted with the beauty of the lace. She offered to pay the girl for sewing 2 tunics. Gerfel, hearing this, was shocked that the boutique owner had offered such a price. He got angry because it was pure robbery. Even he could see at first glance how high quality the work was, and he was outraged that it was valued at 2 tunics. The girl continued and said that it was then that she realized one unpleasant thing, namely, that even if you are talented and know how to work with your hands, but have neither power nor money, all efforts are simply a means to fill someone else's wallet. She closed her eyes and asked the men if it was too petty of her. Raymond suddenly addressed the girl by name and asked where this boutique was located. Hilda replied to this that everything was fine, and it was already in the past, and she was actually even grateful to Mrs. Shirley. And then she asked the surprised Crown Prince if he truly appreciated her skills. Raymond looked seriously at Hilda and replied that it was true. And then, asking the girl not to overwork herself, he said that it was time for them to go. When His Highness and his assistant were already leaving, Hilda wished him the same. As the men walked down the corridor, the Crown Prince turned to Gerfel and said that from now on, his main priority was not him, but Lady Bailey, to which he agreed. And then, turning to his assistant, he ordered him to find out everything about that boutique and its owner, Madame Shirley. He also asked to make sure that rumors about this did not reach Hilda. Gerfel bowed in response and said that he would take measures. They walked through the corridors of the palace, and Raymond could not understand why he was so angry. The Crown Prince realized that the girl was not mistaken when she said that he truly appreciated her skills. Suddenly, His Highness covered his face with his hand and uttered the name of Prince Trigo. Gerfel did not understand what he had to do with it and, apologizing, asked again what the Crown Prince meant. And Raymond, still not removing his hand from his face, asked his assistant to allow Hilda to meet with Aiden. Gerfel was surprised by these words and asked if he had completed negotiations with Trigo. Raymond responded to this by saying that they had agreed that Trigo would provide all the necessary fabrics and materials and that the details would be clarified later, but he added that there would be no compensation this time. And then His Highness said that Trigo thought that Hildegard was worth the effort and looked at his assistant. The crown prince sternly told her to only communicate with Aiden when necessary and in his presence, to which Jerfel replied that he promised to be very attentive. The next morning, Hilda's room was illuminated by the bright rays of the sun that peered through the windows. When the girl was getting ready to meet Aiden, her mother asked if she was sure she wanted to wear such a nondescript dress. To this, Hilda replied that this was not a social reception, and the countess added that her daughter was, after all, meeting the prince of another state, to which the girl replied that Jerfel said that everything was in order, and the prince did not attach importance to formalities. To this, her mother remarked that she could also see His Highness, to which Hilda replied that anything was possible, but she did not have time to dress up. And then, smiling and looking at the countess, she added that Raymond did not choose her for her appearance. Her mother just exchanged glances with the maid and did not respond to this. The girl remembered that thanks to Raymond, her mother was allowed to stay in the palace for a month. She was officially registered as a court servant, but this is only a formality because she is recovering under the supervision of Lucy and is being treated by the court physician. Smiling at her mother, the girl said that she needed to go to the reception area. In response, the woman wished her to take care of herself. Seeing Jerfel in the corridor, Hilda asked how long he had been waiting, to which she received a negative answer. The crown prince's assistant looked attentively at His Highness's bride. The girl, seeing this look, asked why he was looking at her like that, to which he replied that it was nothing like that, and invited her to go into the reception area. When they entered there, Hilda turned to Jerfel, who remained at the door, and asked him to tell her when Prince Aiden would arrive, and in the meantime she would start the patterns. Upon hearing this, the young man asked if she had already chosen the style of the dress. Smiling at him, the girl answered this question positively. Hilda got to work and spread a huge canvas of fabric on the table. Jerfel stood silently at the door and watched Her Highness closely. Hearing footsteps, he turned around and saw the prince from Trigo approaching the reception room. When Jerfel wanted to inform Lady Bailey that the prince had arrived, he suddenly covered his mouth with his hand. And then, with a wink, Aiden told the young man that he simply wanted to watch Her Highness work for a while. Wiping his mouth with his hand and looking at the prince from Trigo with hostility, Jerfel thought that this would not harm the girl. Smiling, he asked Aiden what he would get in return, to which Aiden replied that he would tell him later. Then the assistant added that he was taking him at his word, and hearing this, the prince thought that he was very cunning. Aiden, holding his chin in his hand, prepared to watch Lady Bailey closely. Watching the girl lay out the fabric, he thought he was wondering how talented this pearl found by the Luminan Empire was. And Hilda, taking a ruler and chalk, began to draw with concentration directly on the fabric. The girl was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice anyone or anything. Aiden, watching her, became more and more serious because he did not quite understand what Lady Bailey was doing. And suddenly he smiled and told Jerfel that now he understood why Raymond was so fascinated by the girl. The young man, hearing this, thought that Aiden was weak for such things. He remembered that the crown prince's tastes were completely identical to those of the Prince of Trigo, and also, when Jerfel used to look at His Highness's outfits, he thought about how similar their style was. Hilda paused briefly to wipe the sweat from her brow. She suddenly heard someone say that she was showing not only concentration, but also true professionalism. Jerfel, hearing this too, stopped wandering in his thoughts and saw how the prince from Trigo approached the girl. At that moment, Aiden asked what she was drawing now. Hilda, without turning around, answered that she was creating a pattern for a petticoat so that the skirt would be voluminous, and in response she heard the question of what a pattern was. When the girl explained that this is a drawing of clothes, first you take measurements, then you make a pattern, and then you can sew it to fit your figure without the hassle of trying it on, the same voice asked how the skirt becomes voluminous. To this, the girl replied that if she put on a skirt, then due to the weight and tension of the fabric, it would not hold its shape beautifully. Hearing Her Highness explaining to Prince Aiden, not realizing that she was speaking to him, Jerfel clutched his heart and desperately asked him not to say anything. Hilda decided to use an example to show how it would look on fabric. And then suddenly she stopped and realized that she didn't know who she was talking to. Turning around, the girl was surprised to see the prince from Trigo standing behind her. And when he saw the girl's reaction, he asked what happened and whether he had interfered. Lady Bailey, in shock, did not know what to answer. Lady Bailey curtsied to the Prince of Trigo and apologized for not noticing his arrival. Hilda remembered that she had told Jerfel to tell her when the prince arrived, and she looked at him in bewilderment. The Crown Prince's assistant felt ashamed and regretted what he had done to Her Highness, looking at her innocent face. The Prince of Trigo, giving the girl a handkerchief and smiling, said that everything was fine and asked her not to worry. And then he suggested that Her Highness call him simply by his first name. The girl, taking the handkerchief, smiled back and said that it would be too familiar. Suddenly, Hilda turned to Jerfel and asked him to go to Lucy and bring her the scarf she was embroidering. The young man, when he went to get the handkerchief, thought that Lady Bailey was probably going to give it to Aiden and whether he should stop her. Here he remembered His Highness's words that from now on she was his top priority, and so Jerfel decided that he should carry out His Highness's will. Meanwhile, Hilda asked Aiden about the fact that this time Trigo had agreed to provide materials. To this, the man responded positively and added that it was an honor for them to help in the noble cause that the beautiful hands of Lady Bailey were doing. Hearing this, the girl decided that she and Raymond really were similar. Wiping away her sweat with a handkerchief, Hilda said she had a question for him, to which Aiden said she could ask. When the girl said she was going to use satin, the prince from Trigo was very surprised that she knew about it. And Hilda, putting down the scarf, added that she was looking for a fabric that was as close to Snow White as possible. And then, smiling and looking at the man, the girl asked if it was possible. To this question, Aiden replied that satin is a very little-known fabric even in Trigo, and so he asked a counter-question about how she knew about this fabric. At this time, Jerfel met Lucy, who gave him the handkerchief. And then, turning to him, she asked if he was sure that it was possible to leave Lady Bailey like that, since she was left there alone with Prince Aiden. The young man thought for a moment, and replied that it was probably nothing to worry about, since Her Highness had told him to come here. And then suddenly he heard a familiar voice, which asked where it was. Nothing to worry about. Taking the young man by his clothes and dragging him along, His Highness said that he was to blame for trusting him, and the young man asked if he should not be at the meeting. When Raymond remarked that he now knew how Jerfel behaved in his absence, he said that the Crown Prince himself had ordered that Her Highness's words be put first, to which the man replied that safety came before words. In response, the young man said that then they had nothing to worry about because Prince Aiden was not the one who would harm Her Highness, to which he received the answer that this was precisely why he was dangerous. Raymond thought for a moment, as if a picture of their meeting appeared before his eyes. Namely, how Aiden is already bombarding Hilda with questions under the pretext of curiosity. And then Raymond remembered their conversation on the second day of the banquet, when the prince from Trigo did not believe in their love and said that this performance was staged very skillfully. Raising Jerfel in front of him, Raymond asked how much longer he was going to act as if they were still at the academy. When the assistant wanted to object, His Highness let him go and said that there should be no objections. The man remembered that at the academy, although they didn't get along, he always stayed close to Aiden. He did it only to survive in that hell. After all, Jerfel, whom he had forcibly enlisted as his assistant, could not protect him alone. So Raymond clung to the only one who inspired even a little bit of confidence, and his assistant was still stuck in the past. Turning to Jerfel, His Highness said that he could forget about sleep today because they had a long conversation ahead of them, which greatly upset the young man. Meanwhile, Aiden was talking about how the fabrics most commonly used now are like mo or ma, while fabrics that require complex weaving techniques, like velvet or satin, have only recently begun to be produced. And then he clarified that they started producing them only about 10 years ago. Aiden explained that production only began because some technology was obtained from distant continents after the war. And he was very interested in how Lady Bailey could have learned about satin. The girl looked at the prince from Trigo with her eyes wide open, and then she hesitantly said that the thing was that her father was a merchant, which surprised Aiden. Hilda added that it was a modest business, and she had loved sewing since childhood, and her father sometimes brought samples of new fabrics with great difficulty. With her head down, the girl said that this was how she recognized different materials, and at that time she prayed silently to herself that he would believe in it. And then Aiden suddenly said that information about the new fabrics was only given to the royal family and the dukes. And then he added, "Does she really want to say that some merchant from the Count's family suddenly received samples?" Hilda looked in horror at the frowning Prince of Trigo. The girl clutched her dress tightly and didn't know what to do, because she was so confused that she couldn't utter a word. In desperation, she thought that she had to think of something, because if she kept silent now, Raymond would suffer. And then suddenly Hilda heard the voice of His Highness, who said that it was he who had gotten the fabric for her. Turning around, the girl saw Raymond, who entered the reception room. Hilda and Aiden were surprised by the sudden appearance of the Crown Prince. As he approached them, His Highness asked if the Prince of Trigo also found it strange, to which he replied that he was simply surprised to learn that the girl's father was not a major merchant. And when Aiden asked if Raymond had really gotten the fabric, he answered positively and, going up to Hilda, hugged her, adding that he did it because he had loved her for a long time. His Highness explained that he had asked for the specimen to be given to the late Earl of Bailey in his name, so as not to embarrass her personally, to which the Prince of Trigo asked if he had given such a rare thing out of love. And when he added that it was more than 5 years ago, Raymond only gave him a displeased look. Having released the girl, the Crown Prince stood opposite Aiden and answered these questions positively. The Prince of Trigo looked at him and smiled, thinking that this was some kind of ridiculous excuse, and anyone would suspect something was wrong. And Raymond, looking back at Aiden, thought that nothing convincing had come to mind. And then, glancing at the girl, the Prince from Trigo wondered if Raymond really valued her so much. Aiden decided that this couldn't be true, and His Highness wouldn't go that far, and he could press and get to the truth. But after seeing Raymond's reaction, and how he covered her with his body, the Prince from Trigo decided that if he continued, it could turn into a diplomatic problem. After thinking for a moment, Aiden decided to let the situation go for now and turn to Lady Bailey. With a bow, he apologized for his unnecessary suspicions and hoped that he had not offended her, to which the girl replied that nothing terrible had happened. Then the Prince from Trigo suggested returning to the conversation about fabrics and asked whether she was talking about white satin, to which he received a positive answer. And then Aiden asked why exactly Snow White, because it gets dirty very easily, to which Hilda replied that she agreed with him, but a wedding happens once in a lifetime, and therefore she would like Snow White. When the girl asked if it was difficult to accomplish, the man replied that he would try, and His Highness only watched silently. After they had agreed, Aiden said goodbye to the Crown Prince and Lady Bailey and took his leave. When he left, Raymond suddenly addressed the girl by name. Looking at Hilda, he said that he had restrained himself for a long time for her sake, but he could not anymore. The girl, opening her eyes wide and looking at the man, thought that it seemed the inevitable had finally arrived. The Crown Prince sat down in a chair at the table, and the girl sat down on the sofa opposite him, folding her hands on her knees. Raymond wondered where to begin, because he was usually so relentless with questions that people said he had no pity at all. Looking at Hilda, the Crown Prince decided that he did not want to interrogate her, because she was the one he was going to marry. And also, having become sad, the man realized that he was not even in the mood for something like this. So he simply asked the girl if she had decided on the design, which surprised her greatly. Having answered positively, Hilda nervously clenched her hands into fists and wondered why he was asking about the dress. The girl found this strange because she expected other questions. And looking at Raymond, Hilda suggested that perhaps he was changing the subject out of respect for her. The girl hesitantly asked the man to look at the sketch and received a positive response. Taking out the sheets of paper, she showed on one a sketch of a dress and on the other, his future suit. Bending over and placing the sketches on the table, Hilda explained that she planned to make the top of the dress fit tightly around the chest and waist, and the man, looking at the drawing, suggested that the shoulders would be open. When the girl replied that she planned to use lace for the neckline and shoulders, His Highness thought that it was rather revealing, and the back was even deeper, although covered with lace. The mere thought of how many people would see Hildegard in this dress made him angry. Seeing Raymond's reaction, the girl asked him if the cutouts were too much, to which he replied that he thought they would suit her very well, but he decided to himself that if anyone had any unpleasant thoughts, they would have only themselves to blame. At this time, Jerfel stood silently at the door and thought about something. Raymond, looking at the drawings, noticed that his outfit was not the only one, to which the girl replied that there were several. She noticed that the Crown Prince usually wore a belted tunic and sometimes a cloak. And then the girl fell silent, and His Highness, noticing this, looked at her questioningly. Hilda suddenly placed her hand on the sofa next to her and asked the crown prince to move over to her, saying that it was difficult for her to explain from a distance. Hearing these words, Raymond was very surprised because he did not expect such a proposal. Jerfel even opened his mouth in surprise looking at Her Highness. Raymond suddenly stood up and, saying goodbye, walked towards the sofa where the girl was sitting. When His Highness sat down next to her, Hilda suggested continuing. Turning slightly towards the man so that he could see better, the girl began to explain that the top part of the outfit consists of a shirt, a vest, and a tuxedo, 3 layers in total. Suddenly, Raymond, blushing, asked her to repeat herself, and Hilda, asking if she was speaking too quickly, promised to explain more slowly. Jerfel, who was watching this scene, only smiled, but in such a way that no one would understand. Looking at the sketches, His Highness noticed that there were many more details here compared to his usual clothes. He also noted that the shoes were also unusual, to which the girl replied that she thought these shoes would complement the look well, and asked if maybe she should have chosen different ones. Raymond smiled and declined, then explained that this was all new to him, but he thought the image would highlight the empire's grandeur, and he liked it. The girl, slightly embarrassed, looked at the man in surprise because she did not expect such a reaction. And then Hilda suddenly said that she had something she wanted to ask him, but first she had to apologize. When Raymond asked why, the girl replied that it was not on purpose, but she told Prince Aidan about the pattern and the petticoat. Hearing this, His Highness looked angrily at the assistant, and Hilda, seeing this look, shouted that it was not his fault and that she was careless. The girl suddenly grabbed the man by the shoulder, who was not expecting it. Looking into Raymond's eyes, she asked him not to scold Jerfel. Hearing this, His Highness looked at Hilda in surprise, and then, lowering his head and blushing slightly, he replied that he had not intended to scold him. The Crown Prince spoke of what he had assumed would inevitably happen when Hilda met Aidan, and the girl noted that all of this should have remained a secret. When Raymond asked if Aidan could reproduce the design just because she told him, the girl replied in the negative, and upon hearing this, His Highness then said that everything was fine. And then, addressing Hilda by name, the man said that there was something more important. Taking the girl by the hand, Raymond said that he was not asking her to tell him everything, but asked her to promise him something. Looking seriously at Hilda, he asked her to promise not to deceive him. Hearing this, the girl looked at him in surprise and wondered if she was keeping something silent. Was it a lie? Hilda wondered if she could tell Raymond about her past life and how her grandmother taught her to sew. But at the same time, she understood that then the Crown Prince would think that she was crazy. Hilda decided that she could prove her words with skill, but she didn't understand why, and for some reason she was also afraid to be completely honest with him. And the girl answered His Highness that he was not pestering her with questions. To this, Raymond said that, apparently, she had her own reasons for not talking. Kissing Hilda's hand, the man added that if she was not lying, he would close his eyes to the omission, but asked her not to put herself in a position where he could not protect her. Stroking the girl on the cheek, Raymond said that as her contract partner, he was obliged to do so. Lowering her head and placing her hand on top of his, Hilda agreed and thought he was very kind. Holding his hand, the girl realized that he was forgiving everything again. Suddenly, a little embarrassed and blushing even more, His Highness asked about the handkerchief. Hilda's eyes widened, and she looked questioningly at the Crown Prince because she didn't understand what he meant. And His Highness then asked whether the handkerchief was only for Aidan, and then the girl remembered that when they parted, she gave him a new handkerchief since she felt awkward giving away the used one. And at that moment, the girl understood what the man meant, and he, without raising his eyes and still embarrassed by his question, waited for her answer. Hilda, raising her hand to her mouth, tried to hide her laughter with a cough, and then, taking the Crown Prince by the hand, said that Raymond was special to her and asked him to come to the table. Leading the man by the hand, she added that she did not want to give him the same gift as the others. Turning around, the girl smiled at the Crown Prince and asked him to wait a little. Completely embarrassed by these words, Raymond responded positively to her request. Meanwhile, Aidan walked along the corridors of the Imperial Palace and thought about how he had gotten himself into trouble. He understood that Lady Bailey's request was not at all simple because she asked for the fabric to be ready in a week because she still needed time to sew it. Here, Raymond also egged Aidan on with words about whether they were really not capable of such a thing, and naturally the prince from Trigo said that they could do anything. Hearing this, Hilda smiled happily and thanked Aiden. His Highness simply smiled, realizing that the prince from Trigo had fallen into his trap, but Aiden himself already understood this because he acted like a boy, although Raymond also crossed the line. The prince from Trigo, walking down the corridor, realized that this guy hadn't changed a bit since the academy. He remembered that Raymond always had that haughty, superior look. Punching the wall, Aiden realized he couldn't refuse. As long as he bore the name Trigo, his pride wouldn't allow it. Their tailors will curse him for ordering a complex shade of fabric on a tight deadline. And then the man looked at the handkerchief that young Lady Bailey had handed him. Aiden understood that it was hastily embroidered, but every line, every element was a real masterpiece, and this made him even more upset that he was not the first to discover such talent. The Prince of Trigo suddenly exclaimed that Raymond was unbearable and that he was going crazy with envy, but one day he would make him lose his self-control. At this time, Hilda asked His Highness to take off his clothes, which surprised him greatly. With her beautiful eyes wide open, the girl waited for the Crown Prince to fulfill her request. But Raymond did not understand what was required of him, and apologizing, asked Hilda again what exactly he should do. Jerfel, who was standing at the door, widened his eyes in shock when he heard the girl's words. His Highness asked Hildegard again if he had just heard correctly, and then he asked if she really asked him to undress. The girl smiled and took a measuring tape in her hands and said that she needed to take his measurements and therefore he needed to take off his clothes. Raymond, having heard the detailed explanation, only froze in surprise because he was thinking about something completely different. And Jerfel doubled over with laughter, covering his mouth with his hand so that His Highness would not hear him. Hilda looked at the measuring tape and thought that she was the only one of her kind in this world. When the girl complained that she did not have the tools to take accurate measurements, Raymond personally ordered one to be made. Thanks to this, she was able to sew a perfectly fitting dress, but Hilda realized that she should hardly dream of a sewing machine or a mannequin. After all, in this world they had not yet been invented, and clothes were stored in chests. While the girl was thinking about this, the Crown Prince undressed and told her about it. And then, standing barefoot and pointing to his undershirt, Raymond asked whether he should take it off too, to which he received a negative answer. Hilda, looking at His Highness, thought that he was very tall and that everything needed to be measured as accurately as possible because the jacket and trousers would have to be sewn from scratch. Approaching the man, the girl, having passed the measuring tape behind his back, decided to start with the chest circumference. Feeling Hilda's touch, Raymond felt awkward and began to blush. The girl, carried away by the measurements, thought that in appearance he simply seemed to be fit, but now that she took measurements, she realized that his muscles were perfectly developed. Hilda measured the Crown Prince with concentration, not paying attention to his face. She thought that the tuxedo would fit His Highness simply impeccably. The girl reached the back and, lowering the tape along the spine, ran her hand along it to firmly apply it to the back. And at that moment, Raymond became very embarrassed and blushed from the pleasant touches. When the girl finished measuring her back, His Highness turned around and looked at her, and Hilda continued to take measurements with concentration, not noticing anything around her. Looking at the girl, His Highness thought that she was absolutely calm. The Crown Prince also asked himself why he felt so awkward and suggested that it was probably because it was the first time he had been in such a situation. Meanwhile, Hilda threw a measuring tape around his neck, intending to measure it. And then suddenly the girl stumbled and screamed, but she didn't fall. She just buried her face in the Crown Prince's broad chest. Although the man didn't expect this, he still hugged the girl to keep her from falling. Hilda looked up and apologized to Raymond, adding that he was too tall for her. And then the girl, saying that she would quickly bring a stool, ran away. At this moment, Raymond's hands clenched into fists and he made a decision. His eyes flashed as the man decided that he would not allow her to take measurements from anyone else and would do whatever it took to prevent that from happening. The girl brought a stool and, having finished taking all the measurements, told the Crown Prince that he could get dressed. Hearing this, Raymond felt the same feeling when the soul leaves the body. Having already dressed himself with Yerfel's help, His Highness thought that he felt as if he was standing completely naked, and at that moment, Hilda called him. The girl asked the man not to lose weight or gain weight, so that his muscle mass would remain the same as it is now, because if the parameters change, the suit could become tight or, on the contrary, hang, and this would look bad. Hilda decided that she would check everything again the day before the ceremony, and if something suddenly didn't fit, she would have to alter it all night, and asked him to keep the shape, to which Raymond promised that nothing would change. Having said all this, the girl turned away from the crown prince and hurried to the table. Watching her go, Raymond thought that usually she blushed all over, but today the roles were reversed. The girl, smiling and writing down the measurements, thought that now with these notes, everything looked even more ideal. She was very excited and was already imagining how luxurious the costume would be. Having laid out the large sheet of paper that the crown prince had given her, Hilda decided to start with the pattern straight away and, since she had no template, to use the auxiliary lines to draw the curves. Lost in her thoughts, the girl suddenly heard His Highness calling her, and turning around, she was surprised that he was still there. Raymond, looking attentively at the girl who had turned around, suddenly realized that in that moment she had forgotten about him. And then His Highness came closer and placed his hand on the table. Then he leaned over Hilda, gently running his other hand over her cheek and looking into her eyes. At this time, the girl's head was still filled with thoughts about how to make a pattern, cut the fabric, order materials, and much more. And so at first Hilda just looked at the man with confusion. And then it dawned on her what position they were standing in, and the girl suddenly became embarrassed and blushed. After all, she thought that this pose seemed to hint at a kiss. Was Raymond really going to do it? Seeing Hilda's reaction, the man thought that she had become herself again. The crown prince said that it was already evening, and if she started now, she would go to bed again in the morning. To this, the girl replied that she would only work a little bit and then would definitely go to bed. When His Highness, smiling, asked if this was true, Hilda answered in the affirmative. Kissing the girl's hand, Raymond suddenly asked permission to kiss her goodnight, as a groom. Hearing this, Hilda blushed very deeply and, looking at the man, wondered where this conversation even started. If she refuses, he won't insist, and on the other hand, they will soon get married. Looking at Raymond, she understood that it was wrong to just reject her own fiancé. At that moment, the girl realized that she couldn't say no when he looked at her like that. When Raymond called her by name, she shyly answered yes to his question about a kiss. Hearing the permission, His Highness approached, put one arm around her waist, and leaned down to touch his lips to her closed eyes. For some time, the man stood there, hugging the girl and kissing her. And then, pulling away, Raymond whispered to Hilda his wishes that she would have the sweetest dreams. Hearing these words, the girl opened her eyes wide in surprise. Having wished this, the crown prince turned around and walked decisively towards the exit, leaving an embarrassed Hilda to watch him go. When Raymond left, the girl, unable to bear it, fell to her knees near the table. His Highness, accompanied by his assistant, walked along the corridor. But having moved away from the reception area, the man suddenly grabbed the wall. And then he dropped to one knee, covering his mouth with his hand and thinking that he had gone crazy. At this point, a very embarrassed Hilda sat on the floor in the reception area and wondered what the hell had happened. And Raymond, still covering his mouth with his hand and blushing deeply, asked himself how it had come to this. He suddenly realized that the wall he had worked so hard to build had collapsed. And at that moment, the crown prince remembered his first meeting with Lady Bailey and understood something. Namely, that his curiosity eventually grew into interest in the girl. And this sprout took root in the corner of his heart and blossomed. Raymond was still sitting thoughtfully on one knee. And then I decided that it seemed like it was time to admit the truth. And at that moment, he remembered Lady Bailey smiling happily, picking flowers, and also how it pleased him to watch her and feel that she really liked it. Remembering all this, Raymond realized with horror in his eyes that he was not indifferent to Hilda. At this time, Jerfel stood not far from the crown prince and did not understand what was happening to his master. And then he heard a sound and looked towards the bell on the tower, announcing the evening. And His Highness, who was sitting with his back to his assistant when he heard the bell, had some not very pleasant memories. Namely, how he was on his knees. Even though he was entangled in some kind of dark magic, he stretched out his hand towards the boy and tried to tell him something. When the man placed his hand on the young crown prince's neck and spoke the words, Raymond froze in shock. It was this scene that Raymond remembered as he knelt in the hallway with his head down. Jerfel looked at His Highness's back with concern and called out to him. Suddenly, Raymond stood up abruptly and, turning to his assistant, said that they needed to go. There was still work to do. Jerfel looked at his master in surprise, but remained silent. And then, having said that he agreed with the crown prince, he began to catch up with him. A week later, the imperial palace still stood, illuminated by the bright sun. Through the reception room window, one could see Hildegard going about her business. At this time, the girl was thinking about Raymond and how he had been acting strangely lately. No matter how busy he was, he always found time to drink tea with her and talk about trifles. But now he had become silent and was visiting her less and less often. This morning, when they were drinking tea together, the girl looked at him carefully and noticed something. Namely, that he was very thoughtful and had dark circles under his eyes. Holding a mug of tea in her hands, the girl assumed that His Highness was not sleeping well. While sharpening her scissors, Hilda decided that the Crown Prince was simply fulfilling his duties as a groom and was not obliged to talk to her at all. Jerfel, who had been standing at the door all this time, even began to doze off, and Hilda thought that His Highness's strange and depressed mood was not giving her any peace. Suddenly, she remembered how a week ago Raymond had kissed her goodnight, as a groom. And then the girl wondered if all this was because of that incident. And then she called Jerfel by name so unexpectedly that he even got a little scared. Holding the sharpened scissors in her hands, the girl turned around and asked him if Raymond had been sleeping poorly lately, to which she received the answer that he slept very little. Hilda looked at the young man questioningly upon hearing this, and he explained that it seemed His Highness was having trouble sleeping. Hilda thought to herself that if the Crown Prince had insomnia, then now it was clear why he had been so gloomy lately, and she wondered if the pillow would help him if she sewed one. Then Jerfel and Hilda heard a knock on the door and turned to see who had come. It was the Prince from Trigo, who entered the reception room with a smile and said that he had brought fabrics. Seeing the scissors in the girl's hands, he suddenly shuddered and said that she had scared him. Hilda put down the scissors and was glad that Aiden had brought the fabric on time. The man suddenly said that, of course, it was for the sake of the Luminan Empire, but he himself thought that it was just scissors, not a sword, but it was still scary. At this time, the servants who arrived with the prince from Trigo began to bring in the chests. Opening one of them, Aiden said that here were all the materials she asked for, as well as the buttons she mentioned. Looking at everything that had been brought in, Hilda thought that she had been a little worried. After all, there were no buttons in this world yet. But it had turned out even better than expected. And then, opening another chest, the girl suddenly looked at the man with bewilderment. She asked Aiden what it was, to which he bowed and replied that it was a gift for her. The girl was surprised, and usually she wouldn't pay attention to it, but now she is the crown princess, and she needs to be careful with gifts. Therefore, Hilda replied that she appreciated the prince's generosity, but could not accept it, since she had no right to accept anything without His Highness's consent. To this, the man replied that it was simply a gesture of goodwill. Hearing this, the girl said that she still couldn't accept it and didn't like receiving something for free, especially when she had nothing to offer in return. When Aiden said that he swears on his name that he really doesn't expect anything from her, Hilda suggested including this in the contract, which greatly surprised the man. Then the girl explained that he was still entering into a contract with His Highness for the supply of fabrics, and suggested that his words be included there. Smiling, Hilda added that since the prince said that he swears by his name, it would be easy for him to confirm this in writing. Aiden still looked at Lady Bailey in surprise, and thought that a contract for a gift was just something people usually accepted. He thought he couldn't say he had no ulterior motives at all, but he wasn't asking for anything right now, and Lady Bailey might just accept him in silence. And at that moment, Hilda asked if it was really that difficult for him to put it in writing, and if so, let him take it back. Upon hearing this, the man exclaimed that he would talk to Raymond and say that it was a gift from him, and he did not expect anything in return. Thinking that this was not quite what she had meant, the girl smiled and, thanking Aiden, said that she had simply thought that it would be better for both of them. And then she apologized for her tactlessness, to which the prince from Trigo replied that it was not so. Turning to Jerfel, Hilda said that he would be a witness and should convey to His Highness that Prince Aiden had agreed to include this in the contract. The Crown Prince's assistant looked seriously at the Prince of Trigo, who had not expected things to turn out like this. And then, smiling, Jerfel said that he would definitely pass everything on to Raymond. Hearing this, Aiden looked at Jerfel with a displeased expression, surprised that he was there. And then the prince from Trigo suddenly felt tired, covered his face with his hand, and thought that Raymond had really chosen a stunning woman as his wife. The girl, looking at the man, suddenly said that it was time for her to get to work. So standing in front of Aiden, she smiled at him and said goodbye. The prince was surprised by such an unexpected farewell and did not notice how he left the reception room. Standing at the door, he did not understand how this had happened and was very dissatisfied with himself. Hilda, meanwhile, laid out the fabric and realized that it was thinner than it seemed, and she would have to be careful when sewing the skirt. Running her hand over the fabric, the girl remembered how she had asked Aiden to include the gift in the contract. And then Hilda thought that she should sign a contract with Raymond too. Looking at Jerfel, the girl asked him to tell His Highness to find some time this evening when he finished his business. It was late evening. The moon and bright stars had already appeared in the dark sky. Hilda, already standing in her nightgown by the window, thought that she had gotten carried away with her work and had not noticed how time had flown by. And then suddenly she heard a knock on the door and, thinking it was Raymond, she allowed him to enter. The crown prince, out of breath, suddenly opened the door and addressed the girl by name. And then looking at her, Raymond asked with concern what had happened to her. Slightly frightened by His Highness's appearance, Hilda did not understand what he was talking about. Half an hour ago, Raymond was sitting quietly in the reception area, working with papers. Concentrating, he held the pen tightly in his hands and wrote something. And at that moment, he himself remembered how he kissed Hilda goodnight a week ago. Raymond looked very thoughtful and sad at this time. Jerfel, watching the gentleman, thought that he had started doing his own thing again, although before he had always strictly separated work from everything else. And the crown prince's assistant was also wondering when the right time would be to report Her Highness's request. Suddenly, Raymond asked Jerfel if he had anything to say, since he was looking at his watch for the umpteenth time. The young man suddenly asked if His Highness was planning to rest in the next half hour. The man was surprised and asked why he needed that. To this, Jerfel replied that Lady Hilda had asked him to convey something, and then, turning around, Raymond asked what exactly she had asked for. The young man replied that Lady Bailey had asked if she could meet him in 2 hours. And then he clarified that in an hour and a half, and His Highness, hearing this, stood up abruptly and asked why he was only talking about this now. Raymond decided that if Hilda had made the appointment herself, it must be something urgent. It was after this that he burst into the girl's room, calling her by name. And then, without even catching his breath, he asked her what had happened. This scared the girl a little because Hilda didn't understand what he was talking about. Then she said she just wanted to discuss their contract with him. She thought that perhaps she needed to explain everything in more detail to Jerfel. When they sat down at a table opposite each other, Raymond said that everything was fine, and he just thought that the matter was urgent since she asked. And then the man thought about something, slightly lowering his head. At that moment, the girl, looking at His Highness, thought that she felt somehow awkward. Raymond looked at the girl and asked if she had decided what she wanted to add to the contract, and received a positive answer. Smiling, Hilda asked if she could have her own studio. A room like this reception room would be ideal, she added. Having called the contract, Raymond said that after the wedding she would be given several rooms in the castle. When the man added this point, he said that she could ask for anything she needed for the work, and the girl thought that she would have her own workshop. Hilda remembered how in a past life she shared it with her grandmother, and in the old estate she had to work simply in her bedroom. So, upon hearing Raymond's consent, Hilda was very happy. And at that moment, His Highness asked if she wanted to include anything else in the contract. The girl suddenly lowered her head and timidly said that there was something else. Embarrassed, she asked the crown prince not to take concubines, which greatly surprised him. Hilda remembered that of all the customs of this world, there was one that she never understood. Namely, the institution of concubines. Although she had never heard of the royal couple having concubines, the very fact of such a tradition should be stipulated in the contract. The girl added that this point would also apply to her, because they may seem like a couple in love, but they both know that this is not the case. Hilda lowered her head and added that if someone he truly loved ever came into his life, she hoped he would divorce her and marry that girl legally. With these words, Her Highness unpleasantly surprised the crown prince. Looking at the girl, Raymond wondered if she really perceived him that way. When Hilda raised her head and apologized, the man added that this would not happen. Looking at His Highness, the girl exclaimed that he had misunderstood her, and that she had not at all thought that he would act like that. Hilda explained that she just wanted to be on the safe side so that if something went wrong, they wouldn't part on bad terms, and apologized if she hurt his feelings. Raymond replied that she didn't need to apologize and asked if there was anything else she wanted to add. The girl, thinking that the crown prince had grown very cold, replied that that was all. Hilda, looking at Raymond, did not understand why he took it so harshly. She knew that the crown prince could get angry and consider it too much, but she never expected such a reaction. Could he really not stand betrayal? Meanwhile, the man, handing her the contract, said that it was completed and asked her to look at it and sign it. The girl, taking it, thought that their relationship was sealed with only one piece of paper, and if suddenly during its duration they fell in love with each other, it would be an ideal outcome. But at the same time, Hilda understood that this only happens in fairy tales. And then, taking a fountain pen, the girl resolutely signed the contract. Raymond at this time only silently watched Hilda. Already approaching the door, His Highness wished the girl a good rest. Taking hold of the handle, the crown prince suddenly stopped. And then, after thinking for a while, the man decided to ask the girl something. Raymond said he wondered if he suddenly fell in love with her, it would be a problem. Hilda, hearing this unexpected question, looked at His Highness in surprise. And Raymond, looking attentively at the girl, silently waited for an answer. Hilda didn't understand what he meant and wondered if her words had hurt his pride. Thinking that it didn't seem like he was saying this because he had feelings for her, the girl replied that it wasn't her decision to make. She added that Raymond's heart belonged only to him, and who was she to take away someone's freedom? And then, smiling, Hilda asked if she had asked the same question, he would have said that it was unacceptable or not. Raymond smiled and replied that he wouldn't say that. The joyful girl, still smiling, noted that she had meant it too. After this, His Highness, looking seriously at Hilda, said that everything was clear to him. And then, taking her hand and raising it to his lips, he wished the girl good night. As Raymond was about to leave, Hilda suddenly called out to him. Turning around, he looked closely at the girl, and she thought that the crown prince was behaving very confidently during the negotiations, and she was far from him. And then, closing her eyes, she decided that although she was not so cold-blooded, she would try very hard. With these thoughts, the girl approached His Highness and stood on her toes. And then, reaching for Raymond's cheek, Hilda touched her lips to his cheek. The man felt the touch of the girl's tender lips and froze in surprise. Embarrassed, Hilda took a step back, looked at Raymond, and also wished him good night. His Highness stood there for a while, looking at the girl. When the crown prince left the girl's room, Jerfel looked at him in surprise. He saw Raymond kneeling down and asked what he was doing there, to which the man replied that he was meditating. And then, waving his hand, he told Jerfel to stay where he was and not to pay any attention to him. The crown prince, who was very red in the face, felt as if he was torn between heaven and hell. And then the man realized that it was time to admit to himself that he had finally fallen in love with Hilda. His Highness again remembered his uncle, namely the moment before the execution. And then, becoming serious, the crown prince stood up, having made some decision. He decided that a mistake can only be called something that happens once, and if you can't change the past, then it's not worth it. Then, calling Jerfel, the man walked with decisive steps about his business. Raymond realized that it was better to face the truth than to run from it.